Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I was 24. I worked part-time at a little bookstore tucked in the quieter part of downtown Springfield. Place was called Riverside Books. If you blinked walking past it, you'd miss it. Just a faded blue awning and a chalkboard sign nobody ever bothered to update. It wasn't glamorous, but it had a charm I liked. I felt comfortable there, at least until the night everything changed. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were usually dead. Amanda, my manager, called me around noon, practically begging me to cover the closing shift. Kevin, the guy scheduled to work, had gotten food poisoning or something. I didn't want to, honestly. I had plans, crappy ones, but still plans. But I needed the hours, so I said sure. When you're alone in an old bookstore after dark, the quiet isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It settles on you thick and slow until every creak and thud feels personal. After about 8 p.m., it was just me and the low hum of the ceiling fans spinning like they could barely be bothered. I was halfway through vacuuming the main aisle when I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap coming from the back. I froze, stood there like an idiot with my hand still on the vacuum handle. The store should have been empty. No customers, no delivery scheduled, nobody hiding in the aisles. I'd done a sweep earlier, like I always did. I told myself it was probably the plumbing. Old buildings do weird stuff. Maybe a rat in the walls. Gross, but manageable. I forced myself to keep cleaning, peppered this time. I clicked the vacuum off, the sudden silence making my ears ring. My heart started thudding in my chest, so loud it almost drowned out everything else. I called out hello, like an idiot, expecting I don't know, maybe Amanda surprising me with coffee or something. Nothing. I crept toward the back, trying to be brave, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I got to the stockroom door, it looked normal. Closed, locked, like I left it after dinner. I even jiggled the handle to make sure. Still locked. I laughed under my breath, nervous energy. Just the building, I told myself. I turned away to go back to the front, and that's when I heard it. A long, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. Inside. That was not the building settling. I backed away so fast I almost tripped over the vacuum cord. Pulled my phone out of my pocket. 0 bars, of course. The one time I needed to call someone. I stood there for a few seconds, breathing hard, keys clinking in my sweaty hands. My whole body was tense, wired like a pulled rubber band. Just grab your stuff and go, I thought. I moved toward the register to close up as fast as humanly possible. My checklist went out the window. Just grab, slam, lock, leave. Then the lights flickered. I don't mean a quick power surge flicker. They buzzed, dimmed to this gross, sickly yellow, and stayed there, barely hanging on. The ceiling fan stuttered once, then groaned to a stop. The silence that followed was wrong. Too full, too expectant. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught something move. I whipped my head around. Nothing. Just shelves of books, still and dusty, stretching into the gloom. I whispered nope under my breath and speed walked to the front door, not even caring how loud I was anymore. When I got there, I yanked the handle. It didn't move. It wasn't locked. I double-checked. It just refused to open, like the whole building had decided I was staying put. I yanked harder, kicking it with my boot, slamming my shoulder into it. Nothing. Then from somewhere behind me, clear as day, a whisper. "Don't go." It was so soft, I almost thought I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I turned around so fast I felt my neck crack. Nothing. Nobody. Just the empty, silent store stretching out behind me. I was panting now, panic clawing at my throat. I tried the door again, uselessly, my hands slipping on the handle. That's when I saw them. Fingerprints smudged low on the glass, dragging downward. Not mine, smaller, child-sized. My stomach flipped. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I didn't think, I didn't rationalize. I just ran. I bolted for the emergency exit at the back, slamming through aisles, knocking over a display stand without even slowing down. The emergency exit was this heavy metal door we were always told never to use unless there was a fire. I didn't care. I hit the bar at full speed. It banged open so hard it echoed down the alley. Cold night air slapped me across the face. I stumbled out into the alleyway, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't look back at first, just kept moving, half tripping over my own feet until I got halfway to my car. Curiosity got the better of me. I turned. The windows of Riverside Books were pitch black. No lights, no movement, no sign of anything at all. For half a second, I thought I saw a shape standing just inside the glass. Small, like a kid. But then I blinked and it was gone. I didn't stick around for a second look. I jumped into my car, peeled out of there without even buckling my seatbelt. I drove straight home, ran up to my apartment, and locked the door behind me. That night I emailed Amanda. I quit, effective immediately. I'm sorry. She tried calling the next morning, left me a voicemail sounding confused and a little pissed. I never called back. I never went to pick up my last paycheck either. But honestly, it wasn't worth it. Whatever was in that bookstore, whatever whispered at me, whatever dragged its fingers down that glass, it could keep the damn place. I was never setting foot near Riverside Books again. My name's Rebecca Torres, and back when I was 28, I used to work late all the time at Metropolitan Law Firm, this big soul-sucking office building downtown. Late nights never bothered me, honestly. I kind of liked it. The building would empty out by 6, and by 7 it was just me, my earbuds, and the low hum of vending machines in the break room. It was peaceful in a weird, abandoned mall sort of way. No phone calls, no meetings, no one popping their head over my cubicle to circle back about something pointless. That night, a Thursday, started off like any other. I had a stack of legal briefs to finish, half of them busy work if I'm being honest, and the office was so dead you could hear the elevator cables creaking 3 floors above. I wasn't paying much attention to the time until Mr. Rodriguez, one of the janitors, knocked on the side of my cubicle. He looked uncomfortable, kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. Said he had a family emergency and had to cut out early. I smiled and told him not to worry about it, waved him off like it was no big deal, even though a little part of me wished I had a reason to bail too. After he left, the building just changed. The silence got heavier, almost like the walls themselves were listening. At first I figured it was just me being dramatic, so I turned on some music, low enough that I could still hear if someone walked up behind me, just in case. You spend enough nights alone in an office, you get paranoid like that. About 10 minutes later, I caught it. Movement in the reflection of my monitor. I saw something, a shadow, dart across the rows of cubicles. It was fast, like someone ducking down when they realized they'd been spotted. I whipped around so fast my chair squeaked across the floor. Nothing. Empty chairs, empty desks, blinking computer screens. I sat there for a second, heart thudding way harder than it should have been, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe just the cleaning staff, maybe my own shadow, maybe too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I tried to go back to work, but once you start feeling watched, it's impossible to focus. And then I heard it, breathing. Soft, wet, shaky. It was close, way too close. I froze, hands hovering over the keyboard. The air around me felt tight, like the space was shrinking. I didn't dare turn around at first, part of me thinking, if I don't look, it's not real. But survival instinct won out. I stood up slowly. The chair let out this terrible creaking sound that echoed across the whole empty floor. I turned, scanned the room. Nothing, but the breathing didn't stop. It was coming from somewhere behind the cubicle walls, close enough that I could feel the tiny shifts in the air. I forced out a shaky hello. My voice barely made a dent in the heavy silence. Nothing answered. No cleaning carts, no janitors, no security guard yawning into a walkie-talkie. Every single instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. I grabbed my bag and moved fast toward the elevators, not quite running, but moving with that fast, panicked walk people do when they're trying to pretend they're not terrified. I jammed the call button for the elevator, glancing behind me every 2 seconds. The seconds stretched out into forever, my hand getting clammy just hovering over the button. Then I saw it, the conference room light, it was on. I know for a fact it hadn't been earlier, I would have noticed. Inside the glass-walled room, the long mahogany table sat empty, but at the far end, a single chair was spinning, just slowly turning, like someone had pushed off from the table and stood up. I stood there frozen, gut twisting itself into knots. I knew, in that way your body sometimes knows things before your brain catches up, that I shouldn't look, that I should just leave. But I couldn't move. I just stared. And then it happened. A hand slammed against the glass from the inside. Fingers splayed, palm flat. No body, no face, just the hand. I stumbled back, practically tripping over my own feet. I smacked the elevator button so hard my knuckles stung. The hand started sliding down the glass, leaving this long, greasy smear behind it. It looked wet, like someone had just pressed a soaked cloth against the surface. The elevator dinged. The door slid open so slowly it felt like a sick joke. I threw myself inside and hammered the closed door button like it owed me money. As the doors were almost shut, I looked back one last time. Standing half in and half out of the conference room doorway was a figure. It wasn't right. Its head hung too low, its arms bent at weird angles, like someone had snapped them the wrong way and they'd healed wrong. Its whole posture screamed wrong, like it didn't know how to stand inside its own body. I didn't wait around to see what it would do. When I got outside, I didn't even wait for my rideshare. I walked 5 blocks to the next busy street before I called one, heart still hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. After that night, I made myself a promise. No staying late, no matter what. If the clock even sniffed 7 p.m., I was out the door. No exceptions, no matter how important the deadline was. I didn't care what my boss thought. And the weirdest part, I never saw anything like that again. I'm 29, used to work nights doing IT support for a small insurance firm out in Pine Valley. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most nights were quiet. Fix a few issues remotely, answer emails no one cared about, drink bad coffee until sunrise. You know, boring stuff. The night it happened, I was filling in for Derek, another tech who bilayed with a stomach bug. I remember being annoyed about it, sitting there alone in the dim break room around 11:30 p.m., chewing a vending machine sandwich that tasted like cardboard, wondering if it was even worth staying till morning. That's when the first weird thing happened. A system alert popped up on my laptop. Unauthorized access, server 3F third floor storage server, should have been dormant overnight. No scheduled maintenance, no login. I frowned at the screen for a minute, hoping it was a glitch. Sometimes the old hardware sent false alarms, but protocol said I had to check it out, and if I didn't log it properly, I'd get written up. So I grabbed my badge, sighed way louder than necessary, even though no one was there to hear it, and made my way to the stairs. The third floor was darker than usual. The motion lights didn't trigger right away, and when they finally did, they just sort of flickered half-heartedly before giving up. Made the whole hallway feel abandoned. I told myself it was just the crappy motion sensors, kept walking. The storage server was tucked away in a room at the far end of the hallway, past a row of offices. Most of the doors were open. I glanced into one as I passed and saw a desk fan spinning lazily, even though it wasn't plugged in. Paused for a second, thinking maybe it caught some leftover breeze or something. Decided to move faster. When I got to the server room door, I noticed right away it wasn't latched. It was swinging slightly, like someone had just gone through. That was wrong. We locked that door every night, always. Even during the day, access was restricted. My stomach knotted up. For a second, I thought about calling someone, maybe even the cops. But the rational part of my brain said it was probably just a door someone forgot to close properly. I pushed it open with my foot, keeping my phone ready in my hand for light. Rows of old server racks loomed inside, humming low and steady. The air smelled musty, like burnt dust. At first it looked normal, then something moved, a flash of motion between the racks. Low to the ground, quick, way too quick to be a person crawling. I took a step back instinctively. My phone slipped a little in my sweaty hand. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." No answer. I stood there listening, waiting. Every second felt like it was stretching longer than it should, like time itself was hesitating. Then the server rack started shaking. Soft at first, like a breeze passing through. Then harder, rocking side to side, like something was weaving between them, banging into the metal. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. And then I heard it, a voice, a dry, cracked whisper. It said my name. Marcus, that was it. No anger, no screaming. Just a sick kind of coaxing, like someone patting their lap for a dog to come over. I froze. Every instinct screamed, leave. But my legs wouldn't move for a second, like fear had nailed them to the floor. Finally, I tore myself away and bolted, sprinting down the hallway so fast my shoulder clipped the wall. The stairwell was dead ahead, but when I reached it, I slammed into the door. It was closed. It had been open when I came up. I was sure of it. I fumbled with the handle, shoving it hard with my shoulder. It gave way with a loud bang, like someone on the other side had just let go. I didn't stop to wonder. I took the stairs 2, 3 at a time, barely keeping my footing. Halfway down, the emergency lights flickered and went out for a terrifying few seconds. I was running blind, only the dim light of my phone keeping me from missing a step and tumbling. The lobby was empty when I crashed through, dead quiet. The security desk chair was tipped over, like whoever had been there left in a hurry. The front doors were wide open, swinging slightly. Cold air rushed in from outside. I didn't think, just sprinted across the parking lot to my car. Fumbled the keys, cursed under my breath, finally got the door open and peeled out of there like something was chasing me. I didn't even go home right away. I drove for an hour without really thinking, just kept moving. Didn't want to be still, didn't want to be alone. When I finally did crash at a friend's place, I barely slept. Every little creak, every buzz of my phone made my skin crawl. The next morning, I went back to the office to turn in my badge. Walked right into my manager's office, set it down on her desk, and said, "I quit." She didn't even ask why. Just gave me a small, tired smile and said, "Yeah, we figured." 3 weeks later, I heard the building caught fire overnight. Some official reports blamed faulty wiring. Total loss, but I know better. Welcome back, everyone. Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where you're watching from? Thanks. My name's Marcus, and I'm 29. I don't know if I'm just unlucky or what, but after what happened that night, I can't stay late at work anymore. Not even if you paid me double. It was a Wednesday, and I had gotten stuck at Riverside Medical way past closing time. Everyone else bilayed by 7, even the overachievers who usually hang around pretending to be busy. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just had this massive backlog of patient files that nobody else was going to finish for me. By 9:30, it was just me, the endless clicking of my keyboard, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I remember looking around at one point, realizing how dead quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind where every little sound you make feels too loud, like you're disturbing something. At first I wasn't nervous, just tired. My back hurt from sitting so long, my eyes were burning from staring at medical charts. I remember thinking, just 30 more minutes, then you can leave and forget this place exists until tomorrow. Right then, the lights above my desk flickered. Hard, not a slow, old building flicker. This was sudden, like someone snapped a giant switch and changed their mind halfway through. I stared up at the ceiling, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Everything just kept buzzing along like normal. Still, something about it made me sit up a little straighter. I saved my work, old habit, and shook out my hands like that would somehow shake off the creeping unease, settling into my shoulders. I turned back to my monitor, and that's when the screen froze. Mid-keystroke, it just locked up solid. And then, for less than a second, it flashed static, like a bad TV signal. Then just as fast, it snapped back to the regular screen. I don't know why, but that hit me harder than the lights. Static like that doesn't just happen on a brand new office computer. My mouth felt dry. I shifted in my chair, looking around the medical office. Desks, chairs, filing cabinets. No movement, nothing strange. Still, the hairs on my arms were standing up, and my gut was telling me to move. I packed my stuff in a rush. Laptop, charger, half-eaten energy bar, didn't even care. I threw everything into my backpack like I was late for a flight. I was halfway to the door when I heard it. 3 knocks, clear, deliberate, coming from the consultation room across the hallway. I stopped dead in my tracks. You ever have that moment where you feel like you're balancing on the edge of a blade? Where everything inside you screams, "Don't look," and "run" at the same time? Yeah, that. I turned my head, just my head, not my body, and stared at the consultation room door. It was one of those heavy wooden doors with a frosted glass window. From where I was standing, I couldn't see much inside. It looked dark, empty. I forced myself to walk toward it. Slow steps. My sneakers made these tiny, squeaky noises against the polished floor. I kept telling myself, maybe security, maybe someone locked themselves in by accident. When I got close enough to see properly, there was nobody there. Not a single person. The room was empty. Lights off, examination table clean, chairs neatly arranged. But right there, wedged under the bottom of the door, was a scrap of paper. It was sticking out just enough that it caught the corner of my eye. I bent down, and let me tell you, it took everything in me to do that, and picked it up. It wasn't a note. No writing, no "boo" or "you're fired" prank. Just a simple hand-drawn stick figure sitting at a desk. Behind it was a massive, dark, scribbled shape. Messy and angry looking, like someone had dug the pen into the paper over and over again. I stared at it for maybe 2 seconds before my stomach dropped into my shoes. The skin on my back felt like it shrank 2 sizes. And then, from back toward my desk, I heard the sound. A chair scraping across the floor. Slow, dragging. I didn't need to look. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body told me to run, so I did. I bolted for the stairwell like my life depended on it. My backpack smacked against my side, the zipper rattling with every step. I slammed into the door so hard I almost bounced back, then stumbled down the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't even breathe properly until I hit the lobby. No one was at the security desk. No one was anywhere. I just pushed through the front doors into the parking lot, practically flying. The night air was sharp and cold, but I didn't care. I staggered to my car, locked myself inside, and sat there for a full minute before even starting the engine. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my keys. I didn't go back inside. Not that night, not ever at night again. The next morning I emailed my supervisor, said I left my stuff, and asked if someone could box it up. She didn't even question it, just said she'd have someone mail it to me. A few days later, a plain brown package showed up at my apartment. Inside, my laptop, my charger, my jacket, even my energy bar. And sitting right on top, like a cherry on a nightmare sundae, was that same piece of paper. Stick figure, shadow looming behind it. Still no writing, still cold as hell. Just holding it, I keep it in a drawer now. Don't ask me why. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe part of me needs proof that it really happened. But one thing's for sure, I'm never working late again. My name's Ethan, and back when I was 21, I worked part-time at this tiny family-owned bookstore just outside of Millbrook, Illinois. It wasn't anything fancy. Peeling paint on the windowsills, shelves crammed so tight you had to turn sideways to pass through some aisles. Still, it had a kind of dusty charm, like walking into someone's personal collection of forgotten stories. I loved it there, more than I probably should have. Normally we closed up shop by 8 p.m., but one Thursday night, Mrs. Patterson, the owner, asked if I could stick around a little longer to reorganize the mystery section. I didn't even hesitate. I like being there alone at night. No customers to bother me, no coworkers trying to make small talk. Just me, the creaky old floors, and the comforting tick of the ancient clock above the register. Plus, she promised me a little extra cash if I locked up properly afterwards. Easy money. I remember sitting behind the counter, finishing off a gross cup of gas station coffee, stalling because honestly, the mystery section was a wreck. Books stacked horizontally, others shoved into whatever gap they could fit into. It was going to be a pain. I was just gathering myself to start when I heard it. The door's little bell jingled. I froze halfway out of my seat. We were closed. The closed sign was flipped and the door had been locked. Without looking, I shouted, "Sorry, we're closed," trying to sound firm but casual. Silence. I waited a second, then leaned over the counter to glance toward the entrance. Nothing. The door was shut tight. No breeze, no creaky footsteps, nothing. My brain tried to explain it. Maybe a draft, maybe I hadn't latched it properly, maybe the bell just moved on its own. None of those felt right, but I pushed the uneasiness down and grabbed a stack of books anyway. The store smelled like a mix of old paper, wood polish, and something faintly musty. A smell you stopped noticing after a while. I popped one earbud in and queued up a true crime podcast, letting the familiar droning voices lull me back into focus. That's when I caught it. Movement, end of the aisle. My heart jumped so hard it felt like it was trying to climb up my throat. I yanked the earbud out, every muscle locking up. Someone was standing there, dead silent, watching. He was a few shelves down. Heavy coat, hood pulled up, hands stuffed deep into his pockets. I couldn't see his face, just the vague outline of him. Instinct kicked in. Every inch of my body told me to leave, but somehow my feet stayed rooted in place. We're closed," I said again, voice cracking painfully halfway through. He didn't react, didn't move at all. It felt like hours passed before I forced myself to inch backward, putting as much space as I could between me and him without breaking eye contact. I knew my phone was still on the counter, charging. If I could just reach it. Keeping him in my line of sight, I shuffled toward the front, every step making the floor groan under me. When I reached the counter, I snatched up my phone like it was a lifeline, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I glanced back down the aisle and he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no flicker of movement, just gone. That was the moment the rational part of me gave up. I locked the front door immediately, fumbling with the bolt so badly it took 3 tries. Then, flashlight in one hand, I did a full sweep of the store. Every aisle, every cramped little corner, the tiny staff bathroom, the back office. Still, that feeling, the one where you just know you're being watched, stayed latched onto me like a bad smell. I needed to get out. I needed air, a phone signal, anything. I threw on my coat and hurried toward the back where the employee door was. That's when I noticed it. The attic hatch. It was one of those small square panels up in the ceiling, the kind you had to push up to open. Normally, it was nailed shut. I knew that because Mrs. Patterson had complained about it once, said the beams up there weren't stable enough for anyone to use. Tonight, though, the hatch was hanging open. Just a few inches, enough to see the black void beyond. I stopped so fast I nearly slipped on the floor. Nobody had touched that hatch in years. There wasn't even a ladder around to reach it. And yet, here it was, open. I took an automatic step back, almost tripping over a box of clearance books. The smart thing, the only thing, was to leave. Get outside, call for help, whatever. But my legs wouldn't cooperate. Something about turning my back felt wrong, like it was waiting for me to make that mistake. And then I heard it, right above my head. I swear my heart stopped altogether. This wasn't the building settling. It was a heavy, deliberate sound. Something shifting its weight directly over me. For a second I thought about shouting, about calling out some fake warning like I'm calling the police. But my throat had completely dried up. I couldn't even breathe right, let alone yell. My eyes darted around, desperate for something, anything I could use to defend myself. That's when I spotted the metal flashlight under the counter. I grabbed it with both hands, holding it like a club, which probably looked ridiculous, but made me feel 1% less helpless. That's when a book flew off the shelf. Not a little slip or tumble. It launched off the shelf and hit the ground halfway between me and the back exit. It came from the mystery section. At that point, every bit of false bravery inside me crumbled. I bolted for the front door, unlocking it with shaking hands and throwing it open so hard it slammed against the wall. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if anything was following me. I sprinted to my beat-up Honda in the parking lot, fumbling with my keys so badly I almost dropped them twice. When I finally got the door open, I practically dove inside and slammed the locks down. My hands were shaking so hard it took 2 tries to get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I didn't even think. I peeled out of the lot like something out of a bad horror movie, tires squealing, headlights bouncing crazily over the cracked pavement. I didn't even realize I'd left my phone behind until I was halfway home. I didn't care. That night I triple locked my front door. I pulled every curtain. I left every light on. I didn't sleep. The next day I told Mrs. Patterson I quit. Straight up, no excuses, no notice. She tried to laugh it off, asked if I got spooked by a mouse or something. I didn't even bother answering. She asked me to swing by and pick up my final paycheck. I agreed, but only if my dad came with me. Daytime, no exceptions. When we got there, Mrs. Patterson and her husband acted like everything was fine. They even made jokes about the haunted security system. Turns out the security footage from that night was just static. Hours of it. They laughed. I didn't. Neither did my dad. As we were leaving, I made the mistake of glancing up at the roof line. There was a small, grimy window set high into the attic wall. A window I'd never noticed before. The glass was cracked and caked with dirt, but someone, was watching us from behind it. I didn't say anything to Dad. I just got in the car and stared straight ahead until we were halfway home. I never set foot in that store again. And if I'm being honest, I don't even drive down that street anymore. I grew up in Bakersfield back in the 1980s, and honestly, I fell in with some pretty rough crowds during my teenage years. I saw friends disappear into the prison system. Others end up 6 feet under before they hit 25. But the ones I really respected were those who had the wisdom to walk away from that life before it dragged them down completely. By 1993, I'd managed to clean up my act and get myself on the straight and narrow. I'd always been good with cars, so I figured driving a cab would be perfect for me. I could make honest money while still cruising around the city I knew like the back of my hand, picking up the stories and characters that make Bakersfield what it is. I was 27 years old and had been working for Golden State Taxi for almost 3 years when this particular incident happened. Let me tell you, cab driving in the Central Valley is never boring. You meet everyone from oil field workers heading home after a long shift to college kids stumbling out of bars at 2 in the morning. One night I picked up this gruff old biker outside Rusty's saloon, and when I asked him why he wasn't riding his Harley, he looked at me through the rearview mirror with bloodshot eyes and said, "Because I've had 12 beers, 6 shots of whiskey, and I'm too damn old to spend another night in county lockup." I couldn't help but laugh at his honesty, and he tipped me $40 for the 10-minute ride. Sometimes the most dangerous-looking people turn out to be the most reasonable. But not everyone who climbs into the back of a cab is so straightforward or harmless. In fact, some passengers can lead you into situations that change your life forever, and this story is about one of them. It was September 15th, 1993, around 9:30 at night. The sun had just disappeared behind the mountains, leaving that purple twilight that settles over the valley during early fall. I was driving down Golden State Avenue, thinking about heading toward the airport to pick up some late arrivals, when I spotted a young woman standing on the shoulder of the road. She was trying to flag down passing cars, but everyone was just speeding by without slowing down. My first thought was that this wasn't the safest time or place to be hitchhiking, especially for a woman alone. Friday nights in Bakersfield can get pretty wild, and the stretch of road she was on was known for attracting some unsavory characters after dark. I pulled over to the curb and rolled down my passenger window. Before I could even ask where she needed to go, she rushed up to the car and said in this shaky voice, "I don't have any cash on me, but I really need a ride. Please, I'm desperate." The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. She'd obviously been crying, and there was something about her whole demeanor that screamed trouble. But I'm not the kind of guy who leaves someone stranded, especially a woman who clearly needed help. "Don't worry about the money," I told her. "Hop in and tell me where you need to go." Her relief was immediate and overwhelming. "Oh my God, thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me." She sounded like she was about to break down crying again as she climbed into the back seat. She told me she needed to get to the Greyhound station downtown, and as we started driving, I introduced myself and asked her name. She said it was Angela, and when I gently asked if she was okay, she started opening up about her situation. According to Angela, she just ended a 3-year relationship with her boyfriend and was catching a bus to Phoenix, where her aunt lived. She said things had gotten bad between them, and she needed to get out of town as soon as possible. I've given rides to plenty of women fleeing bad relationships over the years, so her story didn't surprise me. Bakersfield isn't a huge city, but it's big enough for people to get trapped in toxic situations with nowhere to turn. I told her I was sorry things had worked out that way, and that if she wanted to talk about it, I was willing to listen. She was quiet for a few minutes, gathering herself, and then the whole story came pouring out. She'd moved to California from Arizona to attend college, met her boyfriend during her senior year, and moved in with him after graduation when she was having trouble finding work in her field. She painted a picture of a relationship that had started out perfect, but gradually turned sour. Her boyfriend had been supportive and understanding at first, even helping her financially while she looked for a job. But as the months dragged on without her finding steady employment, he became increasingly impatient and critical. "We never used to fight at all," she said, her voice getting stronger as she talked. But then it became constant. He'd come home from work already angry, looking for reasons to start arguments. He made me feel like I was worthless, like everything wrong in his life was my fault. She explained that she'd been applying for jobs in her field while also looking for waitressing work or anything else that would bring in some income. But the job market was tough, and the longer she went without finding something, the more tension built up between them. "Today we had the worst fight we've ever had," she continued. "He told me to pack my stuff and get out. Started throwing my things around the apartment, breaking some of my personal belongings. That's when things got really ugly." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'd grown up watching my old man take his frustrations out on my mother before he finally abandoned us. So stories of domestic violence always hit me hard. "Did he hurt you?" I asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Do you need me to take you to a hospital first?" "No, he didn't really hurt me physically," she said quickly. "But he scared me. The way he was yelling, the way he looked at me. I grabbed my suitcase and ran." I suggested that maybe she should call the police and report what had happened, especially if he damaged her property or threatened her. Even if she didn't want to press charges, it would be good to have the incident on record in case he tried to contact her later. But her response was immediate and sharp. "No, absolutely not. I just want to get on that bus and forget this whole thing ever happened." There was something about the way she said it that made me pause. It wasn't just fear or exhaustion talking. There was something else underneath, something that sounded almost like panic. "Are you sure?" I pressed gently. "If he broke your stuff or made threats, the cops would take that seriously. They'd make sure he stays away from you." "They wouldn't see it that way," she said, and her voice had gone cold. "Can you please just drive me to the bus station? I'm begging you." The sudden shift in her tone was jarring. One moment she'd been opening up, sharing her story, and the next she was shutting down completely. It made me wonder if there was more to the situation than she was telling me. I decided to back off a little, but I couldn't completely let it go. After a few minutes of silence, I suggested that if her boyfriend had gotten physical with her, the best thing she could do would be to have him arrested. Make him spend a night in jail thinking about his actions. "That's not going to happen," she muttered under her breath. I couldn't tell if she meant the police wouldn't take her seriously, or if she just wasn't willing to go through the hassle of filing a report. So I tried a different approach. "Look, I know it's scary to get the law involved, but you can't let this guy think he can treat you like this. What's to stop him from doing the same thing to the next woman?" That's when she said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "He's not going to be treating anyone like anything anymore." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact and final, sent a chill through me. It didn't sound like the words of someone who just escaped an abusive relationship. It sounded like someone who'd made sure her problem was permanently solved. I found myself studying her reflection in the rearview mirror more carefully. She was staring out the window with an expression I couldn't quite read, and for the first time since she'd gotten in my cab, she seemed completely calm. "Angela," I said carefully, What exactly happened during that fight today?" She didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice was eerily steady. "Let's just say he got what was coming to him." My blood ran cold. The way she phrased it, combined with her earlier comment about him not treating anyone badly anymore, painted a very different picture than the one she'd initially given me. "Miss, I need you to be straight with me here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you do something to hurt your boyfriend? Because if you did, I can't be driving you around town. That would make me an accessory to whatever happened back there." I wasn't entirely sure about the legal implications, but I'd heard enough cop shows to know that knowingly helping someone flee from a crime scene could get you in serious trouble. If all you did was defend yourself, throw something at him to keep him away from you, that's different, I continued. But if you left him hurt and needing medical attention, that's a whole other situation. As I waited for her answer, I heard rustling sounds from the back seat. I glanced up at the rearview mirror and saw her reaching into her jacket. A second later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. I've been robbed twice in my 3 years of cab driving, so I knew that sound all too well. But this felt different. This wasn't some desperate junkie looking for quick cash. This was someone who'd apparently already committed one violent act and was prepared to commit another. "Just keep driving to the bus station," she said, and now her voice was completely different. Gone was the scared, vulnerable woman who'd flagged me down. This was someone in complete control of the situation. "I don't want to hurt you, Ray, but I will if you make me. All I want is to get out of this town and start over somewhere else. You can help me do that, or you can make this a lot more complicated than it needs to be." My mouth went dry. She knew my name because I'd introduced myself earlier, but hearing her say it while pointing a gun at me made it sound like a threat. "Look, there's no need for this to get out of hand," I managed to say. "I'll take you wherever you want to go. Just stay calm, okay?" "I am calm," she replied, and that was the scariest part. She wasn't agitated or panicked. She was speaking like we were having a normal conversation, as if holding a gun on someone was just another Tuesday evening for her. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I just drove, trying to keep my hands steady on the wheel and my mind focused on getting through this alive. Part of me was wondering if there was some poor guy back at her apartment bleeding out on the kitchen floor, but I pushed that thought away. Right now, my only priority was surviving the next 20 minutes. As we got closer to the Greyhound station, I found myself thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Would she shoot me and take the cab? Would she let me go and trust that I wouldn't immediately call the police? Or was she planning something else entirely? When we reached the station, she directed me to stop in a poorly lit area away from the main entrance, where there weren't many people around. I pulled over and put the car in park, wondering if these were going to be my last few minutes on Earth. "Turn off the engine and give me your keys," she said. I started to protest, telling her I needed the cab to make a living, but she cut me off by pressing the gun barrel against the back of my head. The metal was cold against my skin, and I could feel her finger on the trigger. "I'm not asking," she said. "Give me your keys now." I handed them over without another word. She climbed out of the cab, dragged her suitcase from the back seat, and walked toward the station without looking back. Just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the building like she'd never existed. I sat there for a few minutes, my heart pounding and my hands shaking, before I got out and ran toward the station entrance. There were pay phones near the main doors, and I called 911 as quickly as my trembling fingers could dial. The dispatcher asked me what my emergency was, and I tried to explain that I'd just been held at gunpoint by a passenger who might have committed a serious crime. I gave them the location and a description of Angela, but by the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, she was long gone. The cops took my statement and searched the station, but Angela had vanished completely. She'd either gotten on a bus immediately or slipped out a back exit. The gun was nowhere to be found either, probably ditched in a trash can or restroom. I had to wait for my cab company to send someone with a spare key before I could get back to work. But honestly, I was too shaken up to drive any more that night anyway. I kept thinking about that gun pressed against my head and how close I'd come to becoming another statistic. The police followed up with me a few days later, asking if I remembered any additional details about Angela, or if I'd heard anything about violent incidents involving domestic disputes. But I never learned what, if anything, had really happened at that apartment. For all I know, the whole story about the abusive boyfriend was complete fiction, designed to make me sympathize with her and lower my guard. Or maybe there really was a guy out there who'd gotten on the wrong side of a very dangerous woman. Either way, I learned a valuable lesson that night about being more careful with who I picked up. The roads of Bakersfield can be full of people with stories that aren't quite what they seem, and sometimes helping a stranger can put you in more danger than you ever imagined. I kept driving cab for several more years after that incident, but I never forgot the woman who called herself Angela. Sometimes I wonder if she made it to wherever she was running to, or if she's still out there somewhere, telling new stories to new victims. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Some passengers are just better left in the past, where they can't hurt anyone else. I've been working security at this old industrial complex in Toledo, Ohio, for about 8 months now. It's not exactly my dream job, but after losing my position at the auto plant, I needed something steady to keep my family afloat. The pay isn't great, but it covers the mortgage and puts food on the table for my wife Valerie and our 2 kids. The complex used to be a thriving manufacturing hub back in the 70s and 80s, making parts for the steel industry. Now most of the buildings sit empty, just hollow shells with broken windows and rust eating away at the metal siding. Only 3 warehouses are still operational, and during my overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the whole place feels like a ghost town. I spend most of my time in the security office, a cramped little room with flickering fluorescent lights, and a bank of old monitors showing feeds from cameras scattered around the property. Every 2 hours, I make my rounds with a heavy flashlight, checking doors and making sure nobody's trying to break in. It's quiet work, sometimes boring, but I've gotten used to the solitude. The complex sits on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty lots and a stretch of railroad tracks that haven't seen a train in years. During winter nights like this one, with the wind howling through the gaps in the buildings, it can feel pretty isolated. But that's never bothered me much. I grew up in this neighborhood, and I know every street and alley. On this particular night in February, the temperature had dropped below freezing, and a thin layer of ice covered everything. I was nursing my 4th cup of coffee trying to stay alert despite feeling exhausted from helping Emma with her school project earlier that evening. Valerie had been after me to get more sleep during the day. But with a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old in the house, quiet time is hard to come by. I was staring at monitor number 5, which covers the loading area behind Warehouse C, when I caught something moving near the edge of the frame. At first, I thought it might be a stray dog or maybe a raccoon digging through the dumpster. But when I leaned closer and adjusted the brightness, I could see it was definitely a person crouched low and moving deliberately along the fence line. My stomach tightened as I watched the figure dart between shadows, clearly trying to avoid the camera's view. This wasn't some homeless person looking for shelter. This was someone who knew exactly where the cameras were positioned and was actively trying to stay hidden. I grabbed my radio, my flashlight, and the heavy jacket I kept hanging by the door. The cold hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, my breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the back of the complex, staying alert for any movement. The loading dock area was darker than usual, with one of the overhead lights flickering intermittently. I swept my flashlight beam across the concrete platform and checked the roll-up doors, all secured with heavy padlocks. The fence looked intact, no obvious signs of tampering or forced entry. I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing when I heard voices, low and urgent, coming from behind a stack of old shipping containers. My pulse quickened as I realized there were multiple people out there, and they were trying to keep quiet. I should have called for backup right then. I should have radioed the police and waited in the security office. But something about their hushed tones made me curious, and I found myself creeping closer, trying to get a better look. That's when they spotted me. The first one came around the corner of the container fast, hood pulled up over his face, and I could see he was young, maybe early 20s. Before I could even raise my flashlight, he was on me, shoving me backward with surprising strength. I stumbled, trying to keep my balance, and that's when the others emerged from the shadows. There were 5 of them, all dressed in dark hoodies and jeans, faces mostly hidden. They moved with the kind of nervous energy that comes from adrenaline and bad intentions. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward, and I could see his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Should have minded your own business, old man," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested he was more scared than he wanted to admit. I tried to back away, holding up my hands in a gesture of surrender. "Look, I don't want any trouble. You guys just need to leave, and we can forget this whole thing happened." But they weren't interested in talking. The tall one nodded to the others, and suddenly they were all moving at once. The first punch caught me in the ribs, knocking the wind out of me and sending me gasping. Before I could recover, another one grabbed my flashlight and swung it at my head. I ducked, but not fast enough. The heavy metal casing connected with my temple, and stars exploded across my vision. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as I went down on one knee, trying to stay conscious. They swarmed me then, fists and feet coming from all directions. I tried to cover my head with my arms, but there were too many of them. Pain shot through my ribs as someone's boot connected with my side. Another kick caught me in the back, sending me sprawling face first into the gravel. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though that was bad enough. It was the sound of their laughter, cold and cruel, like they were enjoying every second of it. These weren't desperate kids trying to steal something to survive. They were getting off on the violence, feeding on my helplessness. I curled up in a ball, trying to protect my vital organs, but they kept finding new places to hit. My nose crunched under someone's knuckles, and I felt warm blood streaming down my face. One of them stomped on my hand, and I heard something crack in my fingers. The beating seemed to go on forever, wave after wave of impact that left me gasping and disoriented. I could hear them talking to each other, their voices excited and breathless, like they were having the time of their lives. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. One final kick to my head sent everything spinning into darkness, and I lost consciousness completely. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the cold. I was lying on my side in the gravel, my cheek pressed against the frozen ground. Every part of my body screamed in protest as I tried to move. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and the taste of blood was overwhelming. I managed to roll onto my back and look up at the dark sky. How long had I been out? It could have been minutes or hours. The attackers were long gone, vanished back into whatever hole they'd crawled out of. My work shirt was torn and bloody, and when I tried to sit up, I realized my jacket was missing. They'd taken my radio too, along with my flashlight and even my boots. I was lying there in my socks, which were already soaking through from the wet gravel. Getting to my feet was agony. My ribs felt like broken glass grinding together with every breath, and my left hand was swollen to twice its normal size. But I forced myself upright, using the side of the shipping container for support. The walk back to the security office was the longest 100 yards of my life. I stumbled and fell twice, my legs unsteady and my vision blurry. By the time I reached the door, I was shaking uncontrollably, whether from cold or shock or both. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial 911 on the office phone. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to explain what had happened, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. My jaw was so swollen I could barely form words. The paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, their red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. They loaded me onto a stretcher, asking questions I couldn't really answer, and rushed me to Toledo General Hospital. I spent 4 days in that hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness while the doctors worked to put me back together. 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, fractures in 2 fingers, and a face that looked like it had been rearranged with a sledgehammer. They had to surgically repair my broken nose and extract pieces of gravel that had been driven deep into my scalp. The pain medication helped with the physical agony, but it couldn't touch the psychological damage. I kept reliving those moments in the loading dock, hearing their laughter, feeling completely powerless and alone. Detective Rodriguez came to see me on the 2nd day, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She asked me to describe the attackers, but I didn't have much to offer. Their faces had been mostly hidden, and everything had happened so fast. They were young, I told her, my words slurred by the swelling in my jaw. Early 20s, maybe late teens, 5 of them. They seemed to know the layout of the complex. She took notes and promised to investigate, but I could tell from her expression that she wasn't optimistic. Random attacks like this were hard to solve, especially without witnesses or clear physical evidence. When Valerie finally arrived at the hospital, she took one look at me and burst into tears. I'd called her from the ambulance, trying to downplay how bad it was. But seeing her face made me realize how close I'd come to never making it home. Emma was too scared to come into the room at first. When she finally did, she stood by the door, her eyes wide with shock. "Daddy, what happened to your face?" she whispered. I told both kids that I'd had an accident at work, some equipment that had fallen on me. I didn't want them to know the truth, didn't want them to carry the fear that someone had done this to me deliberately. Jaden, my 14-year-old, saw right through the lie. He's always been too smart for his own good. But he played along for his sister's sake, helping me come up with a story about a forklift that had tipped over. My sister Lisa, who works as a nurse at the children's hospital, came by every day to help with my care. She changed my bandages, made sure I was taking my medications, and generally kept me from falling apart completely. I hated being so dependent on everyone, but I couldn't even brush my own teeth with my hand in a cast. The physical recovery was slow and painful. Simple tasks like getting dressed or eating became monumental challenges. My broken ribs made it impossible to sleep comfortably, and the concussion left me with headaches that lasted for weeks. But the emotional recovery was even harder. I found myself jumping at sudden noises, checking locks obsessively, and lying awake at night replaying the attack over and over. Every shadow looked threatening. Every unexpected sound made my heart race. Frank Rogers, my supervisor, called to check on me and assured me that my job would be waiting when I was ready to return. But he also mentioned that they were adding a second security guard to the night shift and installing better lighting around the complex. The other guards stopped by to visit, bringing coffee and trying to keep my spirits up. But I could see the worry in their eyes, the unspoken fear that it could just as easily have been them lying in that hospital bed. The police never found the kids who attacked me. Detective Rodriguez kept in touch for a few weeks, but eventually the calls stopped coming. I knew they had other cases, more pressing crimes to solve, and frankly, I wasn't surprised. Toledo's a big city with limited resources, and 5 kids in hoodies could disappear pretty easily into the urban landscape. What bothered me most wasn't that they got away clean, though that certainly stung. It was the randomness of it all, the fact that I'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing my job. It made me question everything I thought I knew about fairness and justice. After 6 weeks of recovery, I finally went back to work. The complex looked the same, but everything felt different. The new security guard, a retired cop named Tom Martinez, was good company, but his presence was a constant reminder of what had happened. I found myself more cautious during my rounds, sticking to well-lit areas and calling in my position more frequently. The shipping containers where the attack had occurred were still there, casting the same shadows, but now they seemed menacing rather than just mundane. Valerie worried about me constantly, calling during my shifts to make sure I was okay. She'd wanted me to find a different job, something safer, but security work was all I knew, and we couldn't afford for me to start over in a new field. The kids adapted better than I expected. Emma gradually stopped being afraid to hug me, and Jaden started asking more mature questions about staying safe in dangerous situations. In some ways, the experience forced our family to become closer, more honest with each other about the risks we all face. Months later, I still think about that night sometimes, especially during quiet moments on patrol. I wonder if those kids ever got caught for something else, if they're still out there hurting people for fun. Part of me hopes they learned something from the experience, that maybe the thrill wore off and they moved on to better things. But I know that's probably wishful thinking. People who can laugh while they're beating an innocent man don't usually develop consciences overnight. The attack changed me, no question about it. I'm more aware of my surroundings now, more careful about taking unnecessary risks. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's just a sad fact of life in today's world. I keep working the night shift because my family depends on it, and because I refuse to let fear make my decisions for me. But I also know that I got lucky that night, luckier than I had any right to be. And I never forget that luck can run out when you least expect it. I'm 31 now, but this happened when I was about 26, working as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in Dallas. It was a Thursday night, one of those weeks where everything just piles up. I stayed late to finish a set of quarterly reports that, of course, had suddenly become urgent. You know how it goes. Everyone else clocks out, and you're stuck picking up the slack. It was almost 10 when I finally looked up from my screen. I was the only one left on the floor. Even maintenance had packed up and gone home. That's when I noticed it. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel right. Not just empty. Off. I tried not to make a big deal about it in my head. Offices get creepy at night, sure. That's not exactly news. Still, I popped my earbuds in and played some music, low in the background, just something to fill the air. I was maybe 15 minutes away from finishing when I heard it. Footsteps. Not heavy ones, not someone stomping around. Soft, careful, almost like someone walking barefoot down the carpeted hallway outside my door. I pulled one earbud out and sat there frozen, staring at my monitor like maybe if I stayed still enough, whoever it was would go away. But there was nothing, just silence. I figured it had to be security doing their rounds. That made sense, right? Maybe I missed them checking in. I went back to typing, forced myself to focus. Then the printer kicked off. It wasn't even the printer near me. It was the one way down by the conference rooms. It made that loud clunk it does when it wakes up, and then the mechanical whir of printing. I wasn't connected to that one. I hadn't printed anything all day. Still, I told myself someone else must have sent a file to it earlier, and it was just catching up. But something about it didn't sit right. I saved my work and walked over to check. The closer I walked, the more that feeling of wrongness settled in, like walking into a room you're not supposed to be in. The printer was sitting there humming, spitting out a single sheet. One page, completely blank. I waited for more, thinking maybe it was lagging. Maybe some ghost print job from earlier was coming through. Nothing else came out, just that one empty page. I stood there staring at it longer than I want to admit. My hands were cold, not just cold, clammy, like all the blood had dropped out of them. I reached for the paper. It felt normal, slightly warm from the machine. Ordinary in every way except for the fact that it shouldn't have been there. I put it down and backed away, deciding maybe it was time to call it a night. I packed up fast, moving like if I didn't look down the hall, nothing could be there. Just as I was zipping my bag, the lights above my desk flickered. Not a little, not a blink you could ignore. A full-on stuttering flash, like something out of a bad horror movie. Every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my stuff, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed for the elevators. The hallway looked way longer than it should have. Every step sounded way too loud in the empty building. Even my breathing felt out of place. I jabbed the elevator button. It lit up. I waited. Nothing. No sound, no movement. Just me standing there like an idiot, clutching my laptop bag like it was going to protect me. And then, clear as day, I heard a door creak open behind me. I turned my head just enough to see it in the corner of my eye. The door to conference room B was swinging open, slow and deliberate. No one was there. No shadows, no footsteps. Just the door yawning open into darkness. My throat closed up. I didn't even think about checking it out. Every instinct I had was screaming, "Move." I bolted for the stairwell. I don't even remember how I got down the stairs. I was running so fast it felt like my feet barely touched the ground. Took the steps 2, 3 at a time, nearly wiped out on the landing, but caught myself at the last second. I pushed through the stairwell door and spilled out into the parking lot. The cold night air hit me like a slap. For a second, I just stood there, bent over, breathing hard like I'd outrun something real. I didn't waste another second. I got in my car, locked the doors, and peeled out of that lot faster than I probably should have. I didn't even glance back at the building. After that night, I made a rule. No staying late. No exceptions. If it's not done by 6, it waits till tomorrow. My boss tried pushing back once, and I told him straight. If he wanted a midnight ghost buddy, he could finish the reports himself. I never found out what really happened that night. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe there's a logical explanation. Maybe. My name's Daniel, and I'm 31. I work in IT support for a mid-sized marketing firm in Oakville. It's not a flashy job. Most of the time I'm stuck in the back of the office troubleshooting broken printers or resetting passwords people swore they never changed. It's fine, pays the bills. I usually keep to myself, and honestly, I don't mind staying late when I need to. In fact, I kind of prefer it. There's something nice about being the last one in the building. No phones ringing, no one tapping you on the shoulder with just a quick question that turns into a half-hour detour. Just peace and quiet and time to actually get stuff done. That night, I was staying late to prep some user permissions for a client portal launch the next morning. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those annoying tasks that nobody notices unless it doesn't work. It was a Thursday. I remember because on Thursdays, the cleaning crew doesn't come. That detail didn't feel important at the time, but later it stuck in my head. Everyone else had already cleared out by around 6. I watched them trickle out. Sales team accounts, even the project managers who usually stay until someone kicks them out. By 6:30, it was just me and the faint buzzing of the vending machine in the break room. I was in the zone for a while, had my headphones in, going through admin panels and documentation. I didn't really notice how quiet it had gotten until I stood up to stretch around 8:30. My neck cracked, my back popped. Standard signs I'd been sitting too long. I figured I'd take a quick break and heat up the leftover pizza I brought. Walked to the break room, stuck it in the microwave, and stood there staring at nothing in particular. That's when I glanced up at the old security monitor over the fridge. We have a basic setup. 4 black and white camera feeds looped into one screen. Front lobby, side entrance, parking lot, and the back hallway near the stairwell. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep an eye on things. One of the feeds flickered. Not a glitch exactly, more like movement. I squinted, leaning in a bit. It looked like someone had passed by the camera in the back hallway, just at the edge of the frame. Fast. I waited, kept watching the feed for another few seconds. Nothing. Just an empty hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing, doors all closed. I told myself it was a lag in the feed or a hiccup in the software. Those cameras are ancient. Sometimes they bug out when the resolution resets or whatever. I've seen it before. Still, I peeked down the hallway on my way back to my desk. The only sound was the low hum from the overhead lights and the soft buzz of the exit sign. I sat back down, tried to refocus. It was probably just tiredness, or maybe I caught my own reflection on the screen and mistook it for movement. Easy mistake to make when you're alone in a quiet building. I worked for another 20 minutes or so. Then I heard it. A door closed. Not loud, more like a soft click, like someone gently pushing it shut. I froze. It came from the back hallway. Now here's the thing. There's only one door back there, the stairwell door, and I definitely hadn't heard it open. Just close. I stood up slowly and looked over the top of the cubicle. Nothing. I listened, really listened. It was quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. I called out, not too loud, just enough to maybe get a response. Nothing. No cleaning staff, no coworkers coming back for forgotten laptops. And it was Thursday, I told myself again. That it was probably nothing. Still, I got up and walked toward the hallway. Cautious steps, the kind where you try not to make noise even though part of you doesn't want to know what's making other noise. Then I heard it, footsteps. Light, barely audible but close, just ahead of me. They stopped when I stopped. I was breathing through my nose, trying to stay quiet, heart thudding in my ears. I peeked around the corner. The stairwell door was open, not wide, just a few inches. Enough to show that someone had gone through it or was still behind it. I backed away. I wasn't trying to be brave. I'm not that guy. I don't need to know what's behind the door. I just wanted to be anywhere else. I walked fast, tried to keep it together. Grabbed my keys and bag from my desk. Didn't shut down my computer, just left everything as it was. As I headed for the exit, I passed the copy room. The light was on. I know I turned it off. I remember doing it earlier when I got up to stretch. It's muscle memory by now. Flip the switch, save the power. Seeing it on stopped me in my tracks, but only for a second. Then I kept walking, faster now. Not running, but definitely not casual either. I didn't take the elevator, no way. I went straight for the stairwell on the other side of the building. My hand was a little shaky on the railing. I don't remember every step, just that I was moving fast, breathing hard by the second floor. I shoved the door open at the bottom, hard enough that the handle scraped the skin on my palm. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors immediately. Then I just sat there for a bit, catching my breath. I wasn't sure what to think. Was it just me being paranoid, lack of sleep, a trick of the cameras? I turned the engine on, but before I backed out, I looked up at the building. 3rd floor, our office. All the windows were dark except one. The copy room. The light was still on, and there was something in the window. Not a face, not a person. Just a shadow shifting slightly, like it was watching. I drove home, didn't tell anyone. The next day, everything was exactly how I'd left it. My computer was still on. My half-eaten pizza was still in the microwave. I checked the security footage. Just me, alone, walking around, going to the break room, leaving in a hurry. Nothing showed up in the stairwell cam. No sign of anyone else. Nothing stolen, nothing out of place. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. I've stayed late maybe once or twice since then, but never alone and never near that hallway. It doesn't matter to me if nobody else believes it. I do, and that's enough to keep me out of that building after dark. On the evening of May 14th, 2014, a 23-year-old single mother named Amber Richardson was working the late shift at the Shell gas station on Carpenter Street in Springfield, Illinois. The modest station was a familiar stop for locals heading home from work and travelers passing through on Interstate 55. Amber, known throughout the community for her bright personality and determination to provide for her family, was working alone that night, a practice that was unfortunately common at small gas stations throughout central Illinois. Springfield had always been considered a relatively safe city, especially compared to larger metropolitan areas like Chicago. With the local police department just 10 minutes away and a steady flow of customers even during late hours, employees at the Carpenter Street Shell felt secure enough to work solo shifts. Amber had been doing it for over a year without incident. Just before midnight, one of the station's regular customers pulled into the parking lot after finishing his shift at the nearby medical center. Dr. Robert Chen, a resident physician who often stopped for coffee during his long hospital rotations, walked through the front door, expecting to see Amber's familiar smile behind the counter. Instead, he found the store completely empty. At first, Dr. Chen assumed Amber was in the restroom or perhaps restocking shelves in the back office. He waited by the counter for several minutes, calling out her name and checking his watch as the minutes ticked by. When 10 minutes passed without any sign of her, he began to worry. Dr. Chen knew Amber well enough to understand that she would never abandon her post without good reason. She was incredibly responsible, often working double shifts to support her 4-year-old daughter Emma, and took pride in providing excellent customer service to everyone who walked through the door. Growing concerned, Dr. Chen walked behind the counter and searched the small store. In the back office, he found Amber's purse, her car keys, and her winter coat hanging on a hook. Her cell phone was plugged into a charger beside the register, and her coffee cup was still warm to the touch. But Amber herself was nowhere to be found. After calling out for her several more times and checking every possible hiding spot in the building, Dr. Chen dialed 911. Within minutes, Officer Patricia Martinez arrived from the Springfield Police Department and began her preliminary investigation. The scene inside the Shell station was puzzling. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred. The cash register contained over $300 in bills and change, completely untouched. The safe in the back office was locked and undisturbed. If someone had robbed the station, they'd taken nothing of value. If Amber had left voluntarily, she'd abandoned all of her personal belongings. Neither scenario made any sense. Amber Richardson was more than just a gas station clerk to the people of Springfield. She was a devoted mother to her beloved daughter Emma, and was engaged to her supportive boyfriend Marcus Thompson, a construction worker who'd been planning to propose for months before finally working up the courage. Friends and family described Amber as hardworking and optimistic, someone who'd been saving money to attend nursing school while supporting her small family. She volunteered at Emma's daycare center on weekends and had become a beloved figure in her neighborhood, always willing to help neighbors with their groceries or watch their children in emergencies. Her sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through Springfield's close-knit community, particularly the South Side, where she'd grown up and still lived. Amber's mother, Patricia Richardson, was devastated by the news. "My baby would never just walk away from her life," she told reporters at a press conference. "She loves Emma more than anything in this world. Something terrible has happened to her, and we need to find out what." Marcus Thompson, Amber's fiancé, spoke to local media with tears in his eyes. "She was supposed to come home to us," he said. "Emma keeps asking where her mommy is, and I don't know what to tell her. We just want her back safe." The Springfield Police Department launched an immediate and comprehensive investigation, but they faced significant challenges from the very beginning. Most frustrating was the complete absence of interior security cameras at the Shell station. When questioned about this oversight, the station's owner explained that they'd recently upgraded their exterior surveillance system, but hadn't yet installed cameras inside the building. He'd been planning to complete the installation the following month, a delay that would prove catastrophic for the investigation. Without video footage to show what had happened to Amber, police had to rely on other investigative methods. A canine unit was brought in to track her scent, and the trail led from inside the store to the edge of the parking lot, where it abruptly disappeared. This suggested that Amber had likely been taken away in a vehicle. Crime scene investigators discovered a small amount of blood near the back entrance of the building. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Amber, indicating that she may have been injured during whatever confrontation had led to her disappearance. Police interviewed dozens of people, including customers who'd visited the station earlier that evening, employees from nearby businesses, and anyone who might have seen suspicious activity in the area. Unfortunately, the late hour and the station's location on a quiet stretch of Carpenter Street meant there were few potential witnesses. As days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded beyond Springfield. Law enforcement agencies throughout Illinois and neighboring states were alerted, and Amber's photograph was distributed to police departments, hospitals, and shelters across the Midwest. Extensive searches were conducted in parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings throughout Sangamon County. Volunteers from the community joined professional search teams, combing through fields and drainage ditches in hopes of finding any trace of the missing woman. Despite these efforts, no evidence of Amber's whereabouts was discovered. The case began to grow cold, leaving her family in agonizing uncertainty about whether she was alive or dead. The people of Springfield rallied around Amber's family in an inspiring display of community solidarity. Vigils were held at churches throughout the city. Volunteers distributed thousands of missing person flyers, and local businesses donated money for a reward fund that eventually reached $25,000. National television programs picked up the story, and Amber's disappearance was featured on shows like America's Most Wanted and Disappeared. Her photograph appeared on billboards along major highways, and social media campaigns kept her story in the public eye. But despite all this attention and effort, no solid leads emerged. For nearly 2 years, the question of what happened to Amber Richardson remained a haunting mystery that weighed heavily on everyone who knew her. Then, in March of 2016, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A 19-year-old college student named Lisa Park reported being the victim of an attempted kidnapping in nearby Decatur. She described being approached by a man driving a blue pickup truck who tried to force her into his vehicle. Her quick thinking and loud screaming had attracted the attention of passers-by, allowing her to escape. Lisa provided police with detailed descriptions of both the suspect and his truck, including a partial license plate number. The information led investigators to a 38-year-old factory worker named Darren Blake, who had no significant criminal history, but lived alone in a rural area outside Springfield. When police obtained a search warrant for Blake's property, they uncovered evidence that would change everything about Amber Richardson's case. Blake's blue pickup truck matched witness descriptions from the attempted kidnapping, but more disturbing were the items found in his home and vehicle. Police discovered restraints, sedatives, and a collection of photographs showing young women who appeared to be unconscious or incapacitated. Most shocking of all was a folder on Blake's computer labeled with Amber's initials. The folder contained dozens of photographs that Amber had posted on her social media accounts, along with detailed information about her work schedule, her daily routines, and her personal relationships. Digital forensics experts determined that the folder had been created on May 13, 2014, just one day before Amber's disappearance. This timeline, combined with the obsessive level of detail in Blake's research, made him the prime suspect in her kidnapping. Further investigation revealed that Blake had a disturbing pattern of behavior involving young women who worked alone during late-night shifts. Witnesses came forward to report seeing him lurking around gas stations, convenience stores, and 24-hour restaurants throughout central Illinois. Several female employees reported that Blake had made them uncomfortable with his frequent visits and inappropriate comments, but none had filed formal complaints because his behavior, while creepy, hadn't crossed the line into clearly illegal territory. Surveillance footage from businesses near the Shell station showed Blake's pickup truck in the area on the night of Amber's disappearance. A traffic camera captured his vehicle leaving the vicinity around midnight, heading toward the rural area where he lived. On September 8, 2016, Darren Blake was officially charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder in connection with Amber Richardson's disappearance. Prosecutors argued that he had stalked her for weeks, learning her schedule and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. According to the prosecution's theory, Blake had entered the Shell station during a quiet period, confronted Amber, and forced her to accompany him to his truck. They believed he had taken her to his isolated property, where she was held captive before being killed. Blake's defense team faced the challenge of fighting a case built entirely on circumstantial evidence, since Amber's body had never been found. They argued that the lack of physical evidence linking their client to the crime scene created reasonable doubt about his guilt. The defense also suggested alternative theories, including the possibility that Amber had left voluntarily due to personal problems or financial stress. They pointed to the fact that she'd been working multiple jobs and struggling to make ends meet as potential motivation for disappearing. However, the prosecution's case proved compelling to the jury. combination of Blake's obsessive documentation of Amber's life, his presence near the Shell station on the night she vanished, and his history of stalking behavior painted a clear picture of a predator who had carefully planned his attack. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which Amber's family sat in the courtroom every day, hoping to finally get answers about what had happened to their loved one. The testimony was often difficult to hear, particularly the details about Blake's disturbing fantasies and his collection of photographs showing unconscious women. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Darren Blake guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a verdict that brought some measure of closure to Amber's family and the Springfield community. Patricia Richardson spoke to reporters after the sentencing, expressing both relief and ongoing grief. "We're glad that this monster can never hurt another family the way he hurt ours," she said. "But our hearts are still broken because we don't know where our daughter is. We may never be able to lay her to rest properly." Despite Blake's conviction, one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was Amber's body? During his interrogation and trial, Blake maintained his innocence and provided no information about what he might have done with Amber's remains. Prosecutors offered him plea deals in exchange for revealing the location of her body, but he refused all negotiations. Extensive searches were conducted on Blake's property and surrounding areas, using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and archaeological techniques. Investigators also searched locations where Blake was known to have spent time, including hunting grounds and fishing spots throughout central Illinois. Despite these efforts, Amber's remains were never found. The failure to locate her body left her family without the closure they desperately needed and prevented them from holding a proper funeral. Marcus Thompson, who had been planning to propose to Amber before her disappearance, spoke about the ongoing pain of not knowing where she was. "Emma is growing up without her mother, and we can't even visit a grave to feel close to her," he said. "It's like she just vanished from the earth." The community of Springfield has never forgotten Amber Richardson. Annual memorial walks are held in her honor, and a scholarship fund has been established to help single mothers pursue higher education, fulfilling the dreams that Amber never got to achieve. The Shell station where she worked has been demolished and replaced with a small park featuring a memorial bench with Amber's name engraved on it. The bench sits under a flowering tree that blooms every spring, a symbol of hope and remembrance for a young woman whose life was cut tragically short. Amber's disappearance also led to important changes in workplace safety regulations throughout Illinois. The Amber Richardson Act, signed into law in 2017, requires enhanced security measures at gas stations and convenience stores, including mandatory surveillance camera coverage and restrictions on single-employee shifts during overnight hours. Local advocacy groups continue to push for additional safety measures, arguing that more needs to be done to protect vulnerable workers, particularly young women who often have no choice but to work alone during dangerous hours. Emma Thompson, now 10 years old and being raised by her father and grandmother, has become a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. She participates in the annual memorial walks and has said she wants to become a police officer when she grows up so she can help find missing people. Darren Blake remains in prison, serving his life sentence with no possibility of parole. He has shown no remorse for his crimes and continues to refuse to provide any information about Amber's whereabouts. Prison officials report that he spends most of his time in solitary confinement for his own protection, as crimes against women are not tolerated by other inmates. The case has been featured in numerous true crime documentaries and podcasts, keeping Amber's story in the public consciousness and maintaining hope that someone might come forward with information about where her body might be located. Detective Sarah Williams, who led the investigation into Amber's disappearance, recently retired after 30 years with the Springfield Police Department. She has said that Amber's case was one of the most challenging and heartbreaking of her career. "We got justice for Amber in the courtroom," Detective Williams reflected. "But until we can bring her home to her family, our work isn't finished. I still think about her case every day, and I hope that someday we'll get the answers her loved ones deserve." The Springfield community continues to honor Amber's memory through acts of kindness and service. Volunteers at local shelters often cite her story as motivation for their work, and her photograph hangs in the office of the Domestic Violence Prevention Center as a reminder of why their mission is so important. Patricia Richardson, now a grandmother figure to Emma, has become an advocate for missing persons' families. She speaks at conferences and works with law enforcement to improve investigation techniques and support systems for families going through similar ordeals. "Amber was taken from us, but her spirit lives on in all the good that has come from her story," Patricia said during a recent interview. She would be proud to know that her tragedy has helped make other women safer and brought our community closer together. The search for Amber Richardson's remains continues, with new tips still coming in periodically. Advanced forensic techniques and changing technology offer hope that she might someday be found and finally laid to rest. Until that day comes, the people of Springfield will continue to remember a young mother who worked hard to build a better life for her daughter, whose disappearance shook their community to its core, and whose legacy continues to inspire positive change. Amber Richardson's story serves as both a tragic reminder of the dangers that vulnerable workers face and a testament to the power of community solidarity in the face of unspeakable loss. Her name will not be forgotten, and her family's search for answers will never end. The bench in the small park where the Shell station once stood remains a gathering place for those who knew and loved Amber. Fresh flowers appear there regularly, left by friends, family members, and strangers who have been touched by her story. On quiet evenings, when the sun sets over Springfield and the flowering tree casts shadows across the memorial bench, it's easy to imagine that Amber's spirit is still watching over the community that has never stopped fighting for justice on her behalf. Her story continues, not in the way anyone would have chosen, but as a powerful reminder that love transcends death, that communities can overcome even the darkest tragedies, and that the search for truth and justice never truly ends. I used to manage a small chain of 24-hour diners scattered across rural Iowa, and of all the bizarre incidents I dealt with during my 15-year career, this one still keeps me awake at night. I wasn't there when it happened, but two of my best employees were, and what they experienced that October evening was so disturbing that both of them quit without giving notice. and refused to talk about it to anyone except the police. The Moonlight Diner sits just off Interstate 80, about 30 miles east of Des Moines, surrounded by cornfields and a few scattered farmhouses. It's the kind of place that serves as a beacon for long-haul truckers, late-night travelers, and anyone else who finds themselves hungry at odd hours in the middle of nowhere. Bella Morrison had been working as our night waitress for 4 years when this incident occurred. She was 26, sharp as a whip, and could handle any situation that walked through our doors. Whether it was drunk college kids, rowdy truckers, or travelers who'd been on the road too long, Bella knew how to maintain control with just the right combination of friendliness and firmness. Tyler King was our night cook, a steady guy in his early 40s with a wife and 3 kids who worked the overnight shift to make ends meet. He'd been with us for 5 years and never missed a day, never caused any drama. Tyler was the kind of employee you could count on to keep things running smoothly no matter what chaos erupted in the dining room. Together, they made a great team, and I trusted them completely to handle the diner during those quiet overnight hours when most of the world was asleep. But on October 23rd, something walked into the Moonlight Diner that shattered both of their lives in ways I'm still trying to understand. I was at home, probably watching some late-night television and getting ready for bed, when my phone rang at 3:15 in the morning. When you manage restaurants, calls at that hour usually mean one of 2 things. Either there's been a robbery, or there's been some kind of medical emergency. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Patricia Wells from the County Sheriff's Department. She told me there had been an incident at the diner involving my employees, and that she needed access to our security system to review the footage from that evening. "What kind of incident?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "I can't go into details over the phone," she said, "but I need you to meet me at the diner as soon as possible, and bring the keys to your office." The tone of her voice told me this wasn't a routine matter. Detective Wells was someone I'd worked with before on minor issues, and she was usually pretty straightforward about what was going on. The fact that she was being so cryptic meant whatever had happened was either very serious or very strange. I threw on some clothes and drove through the empty countryside toward the diner, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone tried to rob the place? Had there been a fight between customers? Were Bella and Tyler okay? When I arrived, I saw several police cars parked outside, their red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Detective Wells met me at the door, and I could tell from her expression that this was going to be worse than I'd imagined. "Your employees are physically unharmed," she said as she led me inside, "but they're both in a state of severe psychological distress. They're at the hospital now, being evaluated by mental health professionals." We walked through the dining room, past the empty booths and silent jukebox, toward the cramped office in the back where I kept the security equipment. The whole place felt different somehow, like the atmosphere itself had been poisoned by whatever had happened there. "Before we watch this footage," Detective Wells said as I unlocked the office door, "I need to prepare you for what you're about to see. This is unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of police work." She helped me set up the old VHS player and navigate to the timestamp she requested, 1:47 a.m. I hit play, and the black and white security footage filled the small television screen. At first, everything looked completely normal. Tyler was in the kitchen, cleaning the grill and organizing supplies for the morning shift. Bella was wiping down tables in the dining room, humming quietly to herself as she worked. It was a typical slow weeknight, the kind where hours could pass without a single customer. Then at exactly 1:52 a.m., the front door opened and two men walked in. They looked ordinary enough at first glance, maybe in their 30s, wearing dark jackets and jeans. But there was something about the way they moved that immediately set my nerves on edge. They didn't walk like normal people. Their movements were too synchronized, too deliberate, like they were performing some kind of choreographed routine. Bella greeted them politely and showed them to a booth near the window. They sat down without speaking to each other, both staring straight ahead with unnaturally rigid postures. When Bella approached their table with menus, neither of them looked at her or acknowledged her presence in any way. "Can I get you gentlemen something to drink?" I could see her lips moving, but the security system didn't record audio. The men continued to stare straight ahead, not responding to her question. Bella stood there for a moment, clearly confused by their behavior, then tried again. Still no response. After a few more seconds, she walked back to the counter and said something to Tyler, who glanced over at the strange customers with a puzzled expression. They had a brief conversation, probably trying to figure out what to do about two people who wouldn't communicate. Finally, Bella returned to their table with glasses of water, setting them down and attempting to take their order. That's when things started to get really weird. Both men turned their heads toward her at exactly the same moment, moving in perfect unison like they were connected by invisible strings. They stared at her with completely blank expressions, not blinking, not showing any emotion whatsoever. I watched Bella take a step backward, clearly disturbed by their behavior. She said something else, probably asking if they were okay. But the men just continued to stare at her with those empty, lifeless eyes. Then, without any warning or apparent communication between them, both men stood up and walked toward the counter where the cash register was located. They moved with that same eerie synchronization, their footsteps perfectly timed, their arms swinging in identical rhythms. Bella backed away as they approached, and I could see Tyler emerging from the kitchen, probably sensing that something was wrong. The two men positioned themselves on either side of the counter, effectively trapping both employees in the narrow space behind it. What happened next was so bizarre that I had to rewind the tape and watch it again to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Both men reached into their jackets simultaneously and pulled out identical handguns. But instead of pointing them at Bella and Tyler, they held the weapons at their sides, almost casually, like they were carrying umbrellas. Bella's hands flew to her mouth in obvious terror, and Tyler raised his arms in surrender. But the armed men didn't seem interested in robbery or violence. Instead, they gestured toward the back of the diner, apparently directing my employees to move toward the walk-in freezer. I watched in growing horror as Bella and Tyler were herded toward the rear of the building, the two gunmen following close behind. When they reached the heavy steel door of the walk-in cooler, one of the men opened it while the other motioned for Bella and Tyler to go inside. My employees hesitated, clearly terrified of being locked in the freezer, but they had no choice with two armed men standing behind them. They stepped inside the cramped, cold space, and both gunmen followed them in, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. The security camera showed the closed freezer door. And that's all it showed for the next 41 minutes. 41 minutes of nothing but a static image of a closed door, while God only knows what was happening inside that freezer. I fast-forwarded through most of it, stopping periodically to check if anything had changed, but the door remained closed the entire time. Detective Wells stood beside me, her arms crossed, watching my reaction to the footage. "We've had forensics experts examine every inch of that freezer," she said quietly. "There's no evidence of violence, no blood, no signs of a struggle. But something happened in there that broke your employees' minds." Finally, at 2:33 a.m., the freezer door opened again. The two men stepped out, looking exactly the same as they had when they went in. Their clothes weren't wrinkled, their hair wasn't disturbed, they didn't appear cold or tired or stressed in any way. They walked back through the diner with that same synchronized stride, ignoring the cash register completely, and headed straight for the front door. They didn't take any money, didn't steal any food or supplies, didn't even glance at anything else in the restaurant. They simply left, climbing into a dark sedan that had been parked just outside the camera's range, and driving away into the night. About 20 minutes later, a regular customer arrived for his usual late-night coffee. Harold Fenwick was a retired farmer who suffered from insomnia and often stopped by the diner during his long, sleepless nights. He was one of our most reliable customers, and Bella always had his coffee ready before he even sat down. But on this night, Harold found the diner apparently empty. He waited at a table for several minutes, calling out to see if anyone was there, before finally getting up to investigate. The security footage showed him walking behind the counter, checking the kitchen, and eventually making his way to the back of the building. When he reached the freezer door, he hesitated for a moment before pulling it open. Whatever Harold saw inside that freezer made him stumble backwards so violently that he nearly fell down. His face went completely white, and he looked like he'd seen something that defied all rational explanation. He immediately ran to the phone and called 911. But before the paramedics arrived, he had the presence of mind to turn off all the cooking equipment so the diner wouldn't burn down while unmanned. When the first responders got there, they found Bella and Tyler inside the freezer, both of them sitting on the floor with their hands pressed tightly over their eyes. They weren't injured, they weren't restrained, and they didn't appear to be suffering from hypothermia despite having been in the cold storage area for nearly an hour. But neither of them would uncover their eyes or speak to anyone. They just sat there, rocking back and forth slightly, like they were trying to block out something too terrible to look at. The paramedics tried to coax them out of the freezer, but both Bella and Tyler seemed terrified of opening their eyes or removing their hands from their faces. It was as if they'd seen something so horrifying that they couldn't bear to look at anything else ever again. Eventually, the EMTs were able to guide them out of the freezer and into the dining room. But even then, Bella and Tyler kept their eyes covered. They walked with their hands pressed against their faces, stumbling and disoriented, like they were trying to navigate in complete darkness. When they were loaded into the ambulance, both of them were still covering their eyes, still refusing to look at their surroundings or speak to anyone. The paramedics said it was unlike anything they'd ever seen, a level of psychological trauma that seemed to go beyond normal human experience. I stayed at the diner until dawn, giving my statement to the police and trying to process what I'd witnessed on that security footage. Detective Wells asked me dozens of questions about the two men, but I couldn't provide any useful information. They'd been complete strangers, and their behavior had been so bizarre that I couldn't even guess at their motives. Over the following days, I tried to visit Bella and Tyler at the hospital, but the medical staff wouldn't allow it. They were both in psychiatric care, receiving treatment for what the doctors described as severe psychological trauma of unknown origin. Their families were devastated and confused. Tyler's wife told me that her husband had been a strong, stable man who'd never shown signs of mental illness or extreme anxiety. Bella's parents said the same thing about their daughter, describing her as someone who'd always been resilient and adaptable. Both families wanted answers, but I didn't have any to give them. All I could tell them was that something had happened during those 41 minutes in the freezer, something that had fundamentally changed two people I thought I knew well. After a week of treatment, Tyler was released from the hospital, but he was a completely different person. His wife said he wouldn't talk about what had happened, wouldn't even acknowledge questions about that night. He'd sit in his chair for hours, staring at nothing, occasionally covering his eyes with his hands like he was trying to block out some invisible horror. 3 days after his release, Tyler packed a single suitcase and left town without telling anyone where he was going. His wife found a note saying he was sorry, but he couldn't stay in Iowa anymore. She never heard from him again. Bella's recovery took a little longer, but the outcome was similar. After 2 weeks in psychiatric care, she was discharged to stay with relatives in Nebraska. Her aunt called me a month later to say that Bella was doing better physically, but she'd only speak in whispers and couldn't tolerate being in enclosed spaces. She won't go into any room with a door that can be closed, her aunt told me. She sleeps outside on the porch, even when it's cold, and she keeps talking about not wanting to see them again, but she won't explain who them is. The police investigation went nowhere. Detective Wells interviewed Harold Fenwick multiple times, but all he could tell them was that when he'd opened the freezer door, he'd seen Bella and Tyler sitting on the floor looking wrong somehow. He couldn't or wouldn't elaborate on what he meant by that. The two mysterious men were never identified or located. Their vehicle was too far from the cameras to get a license plate number, and despite posting their descriptions in law enforcement bulletins throughout the Midwest, no one reported seeing them before or after that night. I hired a cleaning crew to deep clean the entire diner, paying special attention to the walk-in freezer. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the place had been permanently tainted by whatever had occurred there. The other employees started calling in sick more often, complaining that the diner felt different somehow. Customer traffic dropped off significantly as word spread through the small community about the incident. People didn't know the details, but they knew something bad had happened, and that was enough to keep them away during the overnight hours. I ended up closing the Moonlight Diner permanently 6 months later. The building still sits empty beside the interstate, the neon sign dark and the windows boarded up. Sometimes I drive past it on my way to check on the other locations, and I can't help but wonder what really happened in that freezer. Local teenagers have turned the abandoned diner into something of a legend, claiming it's haunted by the ghosts of people who disappeared there. They're wrong about the details, but maybe they're right about the place being haunted. Some locations never recover from the evil that touches them. I still manage the remaining diners in the chain, but I've implemented new safety protocols based on what happened that night. No employee works alone anymore. Panic buttons are installed in every location, and we have comprehensive security camera coverage of every inch of every building. But I know those precautions wouldn't have made any difference at the Moonlight Diner. Whatever those two men wanted, whatever they did to Bella and Tyler during those 41 minutes, it wasn't something that could have been prevented with better locks or more cameras. Sometimes I think about trying to track down Tyler to see if he's okay and maybe find out what really happened in that freezer. But then, I remember the look on Harold Fenwick's face when he opened that door, and I decide that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue. There are things in this world that human minds aren't equipped to handle, experiences that can break people in ways that can never be repaired. Whatever Bella and Tyler saw or experienced in that walk-in cooler was apparently one of those things. I've learned to live with not knowing the truth, because I suspect that the truth would be worse than any theory I could imagine. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some doors better left unopened. The Moonlight Diner is closed forever, but whatever happened there, that October night continues to haunt everyone who was touched by it. And somewhere out there, two men with identical guns and synchronized movements might be walking into another diner, looking for another freezer, preparing to do whatever it was they did to my employees. I just pray that when they do, I won't be the one who has to watch the security footage afterward. My name is Tyler Anderson, and back in the hazy days of my mid-20s, I was just another cog in the corporate machine. A junior analyst, grinding away at a small marketing firm nestled in the less glamorous part of downtown Phoenix. Nothing about it screamed exciting career path. Just a regular 9-to-5 that, with surprising frequency, stretched its weary limbs into the inky blackness of late nights. One particular Thursday remains etched in the deepest recesses of my memory. A night that irrevocably altered my perception of empty spaces and the things that might lurk within them. The clock on my monitor blinked 6 times, signaling the official end of the workday. One by one, my colleagues vanished, their hurried footsteps echoing down the hall as they undoubtedly rushed off to embrace the simple joys of their weeknights. I, however, remained tethered to my desk, a prisoner of a formidable backlog of overdue client proposals that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. Soon it was just me, bathed in the monotonous hum of the fluorescent overhead lights. The office, usually a bustling hive of activity, felt unnervingly vast in its emptiness. Endless rows of drab gray cubicles stretching out like a sterile, lifeless maze. Around 9 that evening, my weary muscles protested, demanding a brief respite from the tyranny of spreadsheets. I pushed back my chair, the plastic groaning, and stood to stretch. It was in that moment, as I rotated my shoulders, that I caught it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of movement at the very periphery of my vision. Low to the ground, startlingly fast. My head snapped around, my eyes scanning the empty space, but nothing was there. I remained frozen, every nerve ending on high alert, straining to hear something that might explain the phantom motion. Silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it. The only sound was the faint, persistent hum of the building's ventilation system. A sound that suddenly felt more ominous than comforting. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the unsettling feeling. "Just my eyes playing tricks," I muttered, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. Hours of staring at endless columns of numbers had undoubtedly taken their toll. I even managed a weak chuckle, a pathetic attempt to break this strange, mounting tension. Another hour or so crawled by, each minute marked by the relentless ticking of the wall clock. Finally, the end was in sight. Just a few more entries, a final calculation, and I could escape this tomb of client reports. Then I saw it again. This time it was closer, unmistakable. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I pushed back my chair again, the scraping sound amplified in the stillness, and strained my ears, listening with an intensity I didn't know I possessed. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a primal drumbeat that seemed to warn me of something my conscious mind hadn't yet grasped. I forced myself to stand, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and began a slow, deliberate lap around the office. I meticulously checked behind every gray cubicle, the shadows playing tricks on my tired eyes. I peered into the sterile glass of the empty conference rooms, their long tables reflecting the ghostly glow of the emergency exit signs. Nothing, the office remained stubbornly, chillingly empty, like a forgotten graveyard. When I finally returned to my desk, a cold dread washed over me. My chair was turned around. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at it for a full 10 seconds. 10 agonizing seconds where my brain struggled to reconcile the simple fact before me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I hadn't left it like that. I wasn't tired enough to forget something so out of place. That familiar prickling sensation, the one that always preceded a wave of fear, began to crawl up the back of my neck, raising the tiny hairs on my arms. I spun around, my gaze sweeping across the silent office once more. Nothing moved, just that oppressive, heavy stillness pressing in from all sides. "Hello," I whispered, the sound barely audible, not even sure why I bothered to break the silence. No answer, only the continued, unwavering hum of the ventilation. I sank back down into my inexplicably turned chair, but the illusion of safety had shattered. My focus was gone, replaced by gnawing anxiety. Every tiny creak of the building, every faint whoosh of air, made my skin jump. My eyes darted nervously around the room, constantly scanning the shadows, expecting I didn't even know what. Some amorphous threat lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. Maybe half an hour later, the atmosphere in the office underwent a palpable shift. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. My monitor flickered erratically, then died, plunging my small pool of light into darkness. Almost immediately, the emergency light sputtered to life, casting the entire office in a sickly, disorienting half-light. All sharp, distorted edges and deep, menacing shadows. That's when I saw it clearly. Something was crouched on top of one of the taller cubicle walls, about 20 feet away. The dim emergency lighting made it difficult to discern details, but its sheer size was undeniable. Wrong. Its proportions were all wrong. Its arms seemed impossibly long, dangling almost to the floor on the other side of the cubicle. Its body was hunched and contorted, as if it couldn't quite hold itself upright. And its head was tilted at an unnatural, grotesque angle, a sharp, unsettling cant that defied the limitations of human anatomy. It was looking directly at me. Even in the dim light, I could sense the weight of its gaze. A cold, predatory focus that sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't move, couldn't move. My breath hitched, and my lungs seemed to forget how to function. Time stretched into an agonizing eternity as I remained locked in its gaze, a silent, petrified observer. Then, with a sickening, wet sound that echoed unnervingly across the silent office, it dropped down from the cubicle wall. I heard it breathing then. These horrible, ragged, wet gasps, like it was struggling for each desperate breath. A sound that spoke of something wounded, something unnatural. Then it started to move toward me, crawling, fast. Its movements were jerky and uneven, its long limbs propelling it forward in a disturbing, disjointed manner. Its hands slapped against the cheap office carpet with a dull, echoing thud. That's when my body finally registered the pure, unadulterated panic that had been screaming in my head. I bolted. My chair toppled backward with a loud crash as I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly toward the hallway. My feet slipping and sliding on the cheap, unforgiving carpet tiles. I didn't dare look back. The image of that hunched figure, its tilted head, was seared into my retinas. I slammed into the stairwell door, the metal frame rattling against the wall. I tore down the concrete stairs, taking them 2, 3 at a time, my lungs burning, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Behind me, I could still hear it. That heavy, wet dragging sound, punctuated by those awful, gasping breaths. It was following me. I didn't stop running until I burst through the heavy glass front doors and stumbled out into the blessedly cool night air. The darkness outside was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating dread of the office. But it felt real, solid, safe. I never set foot in that building again. The next morning, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and adrenaline, I fired off a text, fabricating some vague excuse about a sudden family emergency, and quit on the spot. Even now, years later, the memory of that night remains a chilling enigma. I replay it in my mind countless times, searching for a rational explanation. Maybe it was just extreme exhaustion, a trick of the light and an afraid nervous system. But deep down, a persistent, unsettling voice whispers a different possibility. Maybe it was something far worse, something that defied logic and understanding. All I know for certain is this: some places hold an inherent emptiness, a vacuum that seems to invite something else. And sometimes, if you're truly unlucky, you'll discover that you weren't as alone as you thought you were. So after all that with the marketing firm, I was pretty jumpy for a while. My friend Emily, we'd known each other since college, she kept telling me I was being paranoid. "Tyler," she'd say, rolling her eyes, "it was probably just stress or something." But I knew it wasn't stress. The feeling was just too intense. Anyway, a few months went by, and I started to feel a bit more normal. I got a new job at a hardware store on the other side of town. It was boring, mostly just stocking shelves and helping customers find screws and paint. But it was quiet and uneventful, which was exactly what I needed. Then one Saturday, Emily convinced me to go on a hike in the Granite Ridge Mountains. It's this big sprawling park a few miles outside of Phoenix. Usually, I love hiking, but ever since the marketing firm thing, I'd been a bit reluctant to be alone in quiet, isolated places. Emily, though, she's persistent. She argued that it would be good for me, get my mind off things, and the Granite Ridge Mountains are beautiful, with these really old, towering cacti and winding trails. So I reluctantly agreed. We picked a trail that was supposed to be pretty popular, the Desert View Trail. It started out fine. The sun was shining through the sparse desert vegetation, and there were a few other hikers around. We were chatting and laughing, and for a while I actually forgot about the weirdness at the marketing firm. But as we went deeper into the desert, the trail became less crowded. The cacti grew thicker, blocking out more of the sunlight. It started to feel enclosed. Then we heard it, a faint snapping sound off in the distance. Emily stopped. What was that? Probably just a branch breaking, I said, trying to sound casual, even though a familiar unease was starting to creep in. We kept walking, but the desert had gotten quieter. The birds had stopped singing. It was just the sound of our footsteps on the dirt path and the rustling of wind through the dry brush. Then we heard it again, the snapping sound, closer this time, and then a faint scratching sound, almost like claws on rock. My heart skipped a beat. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide. "That doesn't sound like a branch," she whispered. We stopped again, listening. The scratching sound came again, definitely closer. It sounded like it was coming from the rocks just off the trail. "Maybe it's a lizard," I said, my voice sounding a little too high-pitched. But Emily shook her head. "That's not a lizard." We stood there for a few moments, frozen, listening to the unsettling sounds coming from the desert around us. The atmosphere had completely changed. The desert that had seemed so peaceful just a little while ago now felt threatening. "Maybe we should turn back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her face pale. We started to slowly retrace our steps, our eyes scanning the rocks. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of brush made us jump. The scratching sound seemed to follow us, staying just out of sight. It was like something was moving parallel to the trail, keeping pace with us. We started to walk faster, then a slow jog. The sounds behind us seemed to speed up too. The snapping became louder, more frequent. The scratching was relentless. We finally burst out of the desert section and back onto the main park road where there were more people. We didn't stop running until we reached the parking lot. We didn't say much on the drive home. Emily kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we'd heard in the desert had been watching us. After that, I was even more on edge. I started having trouble sleeping again. Every little noise in my apartment would make me jump. Emily, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was starting to get a little freaked out too. She admitted that the sounds in the desert had been genuinely unsettling. A few weeks later, I was talking to my neighbor, old Mr. Thompson, while we were both taking out the trash. He's lived in Phoenix his whole life, knows everything about the area. I casually mentioned the weird things that had happened at the marketing firm, and then our hike in the Granite Ridge Mountains. I didn't go into too much detail, just said we'd heard some strange noises. Mr. Thompson stopped and looked at me, his eyes suddenly serious. "The Granite Ridge Mountains, you say, and the marketing firm." I nodded, a little surprised by his reaction. He leaned in, his voice low. "You know, there's old stories about those places, whispers mostly, things people have seen or heard over the years." "Like what?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Some folks say there's things that linger in those old places, things that aren't quite natural." He didn't elaborate, just gave me a knowing look, and then slowly walked away. His words sent a shiver down my spine. It was just old stories, I told myself, but somehow it made everything that had happened feel a little less random, a little more connected. I eventually moved out of Phoenix a couple of years later, needed a fresh start. But every now and then, when I'm out in the desert or in a quiet old building, I still get that familiar feeling. I nearly lost my mind watching that episode of Monster Quest back in 2014. You know the one I'm talking about, Season 6, Episode 4, the Wolf Pack episode. The one that showed a family trapped in their farmhouse by what they claimed was a pack of werewolves circling their property. Critics called it nonsense, of course, but watching those recreated scenes of creatures stalking around the perimeter, those glowing eyes in the darkness, the family huddled inside wondering if they'd make it till morning. It hit way too close to home. This is what happened to me and my crew on a construction site in northern Minnesota, September of 1992. I was working as a site supervisor for a medium-sized outfit that specialized in industrial warehouses and manufacturing facilities. We'd been contracted to build some sort of processing plant for a regional food distribution company on the outskirts of a small town called Pine Ridge. The location was perfect for the client's logistics, right off Highway 35, but far enough from residential areas that they could run 24-hour operations without noise complaints. For us, though, the site would soon become our worst nightmare. The property sat adjacent to the Superior National Forest, which stretched for miles to the north and east. Our section had been clear-cut decades earlier and used briefly as farmland before being abandoned. Nature had started to reclaim it, patchy forest interspersed with open meadows of tall grass and scrub brush. The client had purchased about 60 acres, but we were only developing the 20 acres closest to the highway. The rest would remain untouched as a buffer zone. We'd been on the site for about 8 weeks when this event happened. The foundation was complete. We were in the middle of erecting the steel framework for the 150,000 square foot facility. September had brought shorter days and a bitter chill to the air. Most days we wrapped up around 6 in the evening, but we'd fallen behind schedule due to supply chain issues, and the client was pressing us to catch up. Our project manager, Jake Morrison, had authorized overtime, keeping the crew on site until about 9:30 for the entire week. On September 12th, I arrived for my shift at 1 in the afternoon, relieving the morning crew. The day passed uneventfully. It was typical construction work with the usual headaches like materials being delivered to the wrong area, subcontractors arguing over workspace, all that garbage. Around 6:30, the sky was starting to darken. We switched on the portable floodlights that illuminated our immediate work area. Beyond their glare, the surrounding land quickly disappeared into blackness. Most of my crew were young guys in their 20s, except for our crane operator, Howard Finch. He was in his 50s and had worked construction almost his entire adult life. There were 14 of us on the site that night, a smaller crew than during the day, but enough to keep making progress on the structural elements. Around 7:45, one of the younger workers, Tyler Walsh, came to me with an odd look on his face. "Hey Ryan, there's something out there beyond the lights," he said. I thought he was messing with me, but his expression was dead serious. I followed him to the northern edge of the site where he pointed into the darkness. I keep seeing eyes reflecting in the distance, like animals watching us. but they're too high off the ground to be deer or coyotes. I stared out into that blackness, but I didn't really see anything. I reminded him that we'd spotted a black bear on the property a couple weeks back, and I told him to stay within the lighted area. I figured that was the end of it. Within the hour, 4 more workers had reported similar sightings. Pairs of eyes reflecting our lights, always at the periphery of visibility, always disappearing when looked at directly. I still hadn't seen anything myself, and I was starting to get irritated, to be honest. This just seemed like a distraction to me. At about 8:20, everything changed. The full moon had risen above the trees. Howard had stepped down from his crane to stretch his legs when he suddenly froze, staring past the floodlights into the meadow about 150 yards away. "Holy hell," I heard him whisper. I followed his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. In the moonlight, I could clearly see 4 large figures moving through the tall grass. They were massive things, covered in what looked like dark fur, moving on all 4s. But there was something wrong with the way they moved, not quite like any normal animal. When one of them rose briefly into a bipedal stance to look in our direction, I heard Howard curse under his breath. "God Almighty, those aren't bears." Word spread quickly among the crew. Everyone stopped working to watch the shapes prowling at the edge of the darkness. I called Jake, who was back at the motel, but he thought we were pulling his leg and refused to come out. He ordered us to finish the schedule and stop wasting time. Around 8:45, we heard the first howls. These deep, throaty howls that seemed to contain elements of both wolf and human vocalizations. They came from multiple directions, suggesting there were more creatures surrounding us than the 4 we could currently see. The men began to argue about what we should do. Our vehicles were parked in a gravel lot about 300 yards from the worksite, in the opposite direction of the highway. To reach them, we'd have to cross an unlit stretch of ground, heading toward where we'd spotted at least 2 of the creatures. Howard wanted to call the police, but several guys pointed out we'd sound insane reporting that we were encountering werewolves. Some said we should stay put until daylight. Others thought we should make a run for the vehicles while we still could. I tried my best to keep everyone calm. Everyone focused on finishing the critical welding work, so we could all leave together at 9:30 as planned. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as 9:30 approached. The shapes continued to patrol the perimeter, sometimes disappearing into the trees only to re-emerge elsewhere. None had entered the floodlit area though, which was a huge relief for all of us. But they were definitely moving in a pattern that suggested they were watching us, assessing us. But why? At 9:20, we began shutting down equipment, preparing to leave. That's when Carlos Mendez, one of our welders, let out a shout that made everyone spin around. Standing at the very edge of the light, no more than 40 feet from our primary generator, was one of those things. In the harsh floodlight, its features were more visible than I wanted them to be. It stood about 8 feet tall, with a muscular, hairy body that seemed like a hybrid of man and wolf. Its snout was elongated, filled with teeth that were clearly visible even at that distance. Its eyes reflected the light with an amber glow. The creature remained motionless, staring at us with what I can only describe as intelligence. Then it dropped to all 4s and loped back into the darkness. Panic nearly erupted then. 3 of the younger guys were ready to make a run for it, while others were grabbing tools as makeshift weapons. I managed to get everyone into the partly constructed office area where we could safely talk without shouting over equipment noise. "Listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Those things haven't come into the light. They could have rushed us already if they wanted to. I think they're territorial, not necessarily hunting us." "They're between us and the cars, Ryan," Tyler pointed out. "How the heck are we going to get out of here?" We debated our options. The creatures continued their patrol, occasionally visible in the moonlight, occasionally announcing their presence with those chilling howls. By about 10:15, we made a decision. We would stay together, keep the flood lights on, and wait. Maybe the creatures would lose interest, or maybe they would move away from the parking area. Quite a bit of time passed in tense silence. We took turns watching the perimeter while others tried to rest. None of us believed in werewolves, not really, but we couldn't deny that we were seeing something very bizarre. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were escaped exotic animals. Maybe they were people in costumes trying to scare us. Maybe it was a mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or maybe something in the air from a nearby chemical plant. None of the explanations fit what we were witnessing. At 11:45, we all jumped in unison when Howard's radio crackled to life. It was Jake, checking why the generator was still running when we should have been long gone by now. When Howard tried to explain what was happening, Jake's response was predictably skeptical. But he seemed to sense some genuine fear in Howard's voice. He said he would drive out to meet us. We did our best to warn him away, telling him to just stay at his motel. But Jake was stubborn and didn't believe in letting his crew face danger alone, even if he thought we were overreacting. 25 minutes later, we saw headlights approaching on the access road from the highway. Jake's pickup truck. The creatures noticed too. We watched in horror as 3 of them broke from the tree line and moved toward the approaching vehicle. We all expected the worst to happen. Jake's truck slowed as the figures crossed the access road ahead of him, clearly visible in his headlights. The truck stopped completely for about 40 seconds, then suddenly accelerated forward, horn blaring continuously. The creatures scattered as Jake roared into the construction site, sliding to a stop inside our ring of floodlights. He leaped out of the truck, face ashen. "What in the world are those things?" he shouted, all his skepticism gone. With Jake's arrival, the dynamic shifted. We now had a vehicle inside our safe zone, but it wasn't going to hold all 14 of us. After a brief discussion, we developed a plan. Jake would drive his truck toward the parking lot with the crew walking alongside, staying within the pool of light cast by his headlights and the portable work lights we could carry. We'd move as a tight group, make it to our vehicles, and get the heck out of there. At 12:30 in the morning, we put our plan into action. Jake's truck moved very slowly, with men flanking it on all sides, each holding whatever tool or piece of equipment might serve as a weapon. Howard carried a portable floodlight powered by a battery pack, sweeping the light ahead of us. I walked at the rear of the group with a welding torch, watching our backs. We made it about halfway to the parking lot when I heard rustling in the tall grass just outside our circle of light. There was something pacing us. I called out a warning, and everyone bunched closer to the truck. Jake stopped, and we formed a defensive circle, all facing outward. The rustling continued, circling us, joined by similar sounds from multiple directions. Feels like they're hurting us, Howard muttered, like we're prey animals. For a long, terrible moment, we stood frozen in place, listening to the creatures moving around us in the dark. Then, without warning, one of them darted through the edge of our light. Just a dark blur of movement, there, and gone too quickly to react. A demonstration, perhaps, of how easily they could reach us if they chose. Carlos panicked and broke formation, running ahead toward the distant parking lot. Before any of us could stop him, he was 30 yards away, then 50. His flashlight bounced wildly as he ran. We shouted for him to come back, certain we were about to witness his death, but nothing attacked him. Thankfully, he made it to the 2/3 point to the parking lot unharmed, then slowed and stopped, realizing he was all alone in the dark. He just stood there, flashlight beams swinging from one direction to another in panic. "Come back here," I called to him. "Don't run, take it slow." Carlos began walking back toward us, and then I saw it. A massive shape detached from the shadow of a lumber pile, moving on a parallel course to intercept Carlos. I yelled a warning. Carlos saw it too and froze. The creature stopped as well, watching him from only about 20 yards away. For an excruciating 40 seconds, man and beast remained motionless, locked in a standoff. Then, incredibly, the creature seemed to lose interest. It turned and loped away into the darkness. Carlos practically collapsed with relief, then resumed his careful return to our group. That strange encounter gave us all hope. Whatever these things were, while intimidating, they didn't seem intent on attacking us directly, at least for now. We resumed our slow procession toward the parking lot, maintaining our tight formation around Jake's truck. 3 more times we heard creatures rushing close, catching glimpses of those dark shapes just at the periphery of our light. But none of them breached our defensive circle. After what felt like ages, we reached the parking lot. The creatures remained visible at the edges of our light, watching as we quickly organized ourselves into carpools. No one would be left alone. We started our vehicles simultaneously, forming a convoy with headlights blazing. As we pulled away from the construction site, I looked back through my rear window. In the glow of the still-running floodlights, I could see at least 6 large shapes moving into the previously forbidden area, investigating where we had been working. They showed no interest in following us as we drove away. The next morning in daylight, Jake and I returned to the site with a local sheriff's deputy. We found large, unusual footprints in the soft earth. These prints seemed to morph from wolf-like paws to something more humanoid. The deputy took photos, but was clearly skeptical of our story. We pointed out areas where the tall grass had been trampled by something large, forming paths that no deer or known predator would create. The deputy suggested a small pack of wolves, maybe mixed with feral dogs. His explanation didn't account for what we saw, though, and we didn't push him on it. The project continued with expanded security measures. We installed more lights, brought weapons, restricted work hours to daylight only. But nothing unusual happened for the remainder of the job, which we completed 4 months later. Most of the crew members never spoke of that night to outsiders. It became a sort of inside story, and when we discussed it together, we just referred to it as the night shift with knowing looks. Years later, watching that Monster Quest episode, I realized I'd never truly processed what we'd encountered. I guess I'd buried it, rationalized it, tried to forget. But those recreated scenes of creatures stalking around a lonely property brought it all rushing back to the surface. The fear, the disbelief, the understanding that I came very close to being prey to something that I could not comprehend. I've never been able to look at a full moon the same way. And when they do come around, as they always do, a bit of dread fills me. A sensation that I can't fully explain. Those who weren't there with us, they weren't the ones in a circle of failing light, hoping to survive the few hundred yards to the parking lot. I've seen things my whole life that other people don't see. Growing up, there was a woman who walked the hallways of our house at night. No one else ever saw her, a tall figure in a white dress who would appear at the end of the corridor, watching. My parents blamed an overactive imagination, but I knew what I saw. By the time I got into construction, I'd learned to keep these experiences to myself. No one wants to work with the guy who believes in ghosts. So when I got assigned as foreman at Riverside Meadows, a lakeside property about 40 miles outside of Sacramento, I didn't mention my sensitivity to the paranormal. 28 luxury homes arranged in a crescent around a small natural lake. The developer called it exclusive living in harmony with nature. They had no idea what was waiting for us there. I'd been assigned to this project from the beginning. Site preparation started in early April, and we were looking at a 3-year timeline to complete all the homes. The developer wanted to create a sense of exclusivity, marketing the community as a retreat from city life with access to pristine nature. The lake was the crown jewel of the property. About 4 acres of clear water fed by an underground spring, surrounded by ancient oak trees the developer had fought to preserve. The marketing materials called it a serene oasis. In retrospect, maybe they should have checked the history of the place more thoroughly. The company I work for had landed the contract to build all 28 homes. It was a massive project that would keep us busy and profitable for at least 3 years. My crew was responsible for the first 8 houses on the western edge of the lake. We just finished pouring foundations and were starting to frame when I first noticed something unusual. It was late May, about 9 weeks into the job. The weather had finally turned, with clear skies replacing the constant rain of early spring. I was on site until sunset that day, checking the material deliveries and making sure everything was ready for the next morning. As I was loading my tools into my truck, something caught my eye across the lake. A small figure sitting on one of the wooden benches the landscapers had installed the previous week. From my distance, maybe a quarter mile across the water, it looked like a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Blonde hair, wearing what appeared to be a light blue dress. Nothing particularly strange about that, except that the property was fenced off and clearly marked as a construction zone. No one lived there yet, and the nearest existing homes were over 2 miles away. Plus, it was nearly 8:30 on a school night. I remember thinking it was odd, but not alarming. Probably a kid from one of the nearby farms exploring the construction site. I even raised my hand to wave, but the figure remained motionless. I decided to drive around the lake to check on her, make sure she got home safely. It would have taken me about 12 minutes to circle the lake on the newly carved service road. When I pulled up to the bench, there was no one there. No footprints in the soft dirt surrounding it, no indication anyone had been sitting there just minutes before. I convinced myself I'd been mistaken. that the fading light and distance had played tricks on my vision. Maybe it had been a piece of equipment left by one of the workers, or a shadow cast by the trees behind the bench. 3 days later, I saw her again. Same spot, same posture, same time of day as I was leaving. This time I grabbed my phone and took a picture, intending to show it to the security guard who patrolled the site at night. But when I looked at the photo, the bench was empty. I took 4 more in quick succession, but in each one the bench appeared unoccupied, despite the fact that I could clearly see a small figure sitting there with my naked eye. Over the next 3 weeks, the pattern continued. I'd see the girl on the bench almost every evening as I was leaving. Always in the same spot, always alone, always vanishing when I tried to approach or capture photographic evidence. None of the other workers mentioned seeing anything unusual, and I hesitated to bring it up. Construction sites attract a particular type of personality, and ghost stories aren't exactly welcome conversation among men who pride themselves on pragmatism and physical toughness. By mid-June, I tried telling myself that stress and my recent breakup were messing with my head. We were scrambling to catch up after concrete delivery problems, and I'd been grinding through 14-hour days. I started leaving from the site before sunset, before that phantom child could materialize again. This escape plan worked for about a week, until the plumbing contractor screwed up some pipe layouts and forced me to stay late. As I was leaving, I kept my eyes locked on my truck, fighting the urge to look toward that bench. But something pulled my gaze there anyway, like a magnet. The girl sat there, rigid and unnatural. But this time she wasn't alone. A woman stood beside the bench, her hand resting on the girl's shoulder. From that distance, I could make out a slim figure with long dark hair, wearing what looked like a green sweater that seemed to ripple wrong in the breeze, as if it moved on its own. My skin prickled. Something about the woman's posture seemed possessive, controlling. The way she stood behind the girl didn't look protective, it looked predatory. The hairs on my arms stood up as I watched them, these impossible figures that shouldn't exist. I started my truck with shaking hands and peeled out, taking the long way home to avoid passing anywhere near that bench. That weekend, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing over the girl. I drove to the site at dawn, checking every inch of fencing, searching for any way trespassers could slip in. I inspected the security system, reviewed camera footage, and tested the motion sensors myself. The place was locked down tight. Dense forest surrounded 3 sides, with a single gated road monitored 24/7. The security logs were clean except for wildlife triggers. No human could have entered without leaving evidence. I tracked down some old-timers at the local coffee shop, fishing for information while pretending to discuss construction logistics. Several opposed our project, claiming we were disturbing things best left alone. When I pressed for specifics, they clammed up or changed the subject. One elderly waitress just shook her head and walked away when I mentioned seeing a woman and child near the lake. I called a buddy who worked for the county records office. He owed me for helping with his garage renovation, so he dug around after hours. The property history was unremarkable. Farmland until the 60s, then timber company land. But he found something odd. The surveyor's report from when the developers purchased the land noted an anomalous ground depression near the southwest shore that did not match natural geological formations. The developers had simply filled it in before construction. By early July, the sighting still sent ice through my veins each time. The girl and woman would appear without warning. A blink and they'd be there, staring across the water. Sometimes she sat alone, small and vulnerable on that bench. Other times the woman hovered near her like a shadow. Each appearance left me loaded with dread, my hands clammy on the steering wheel driving home. I'd given up trying to photograph them or approach. Whatever these apparitions were, they followed different laws than our world. Everything shifted on July 23rd. I remember it was a Friday because the crew had been talking all day about weekend plans. A cement mixer broke down mid-pour, leaving us scrambling until dark to finish before the mix hardened. My head pounded and my back ached as I finally headed to my truck, desperate to escape the sight and the phantoms that haunted it. My drive home took me around the north end of the lake, then south along a newly paved road that would eventually serve as the main entrance to the development. As I rounded the lake, I spotted the girl and woman again. But this time, they weren't at the bench. They were walking slowly along the shoreline path, heading south in the same direction I was driving. I slowed my truck, expecting them to vanish as they always did when I got too close. But they remained visible, solid, and substantial in the golden light of the setting sun. The girl was wearing what I could now see was a pale blue sundress with tiny white flowers. Her blonde hair was pulled back in pigtails that bounced slightly as she walked. The woman wore a dark green sweater and black pants, her long brown hair lifting slightly in the breeze. As I drew alongside them, I reduced my speed to barely 5 miles per hour, my curiosity finally overcoming my apprehension. They didn't acknowledge my presence, continuing their slow, deliberate pace along the path. I was close enough now to see their features clearly. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with a stern expression that wasn't quite angry, but certainly wasn't kind. The girl looked younger than I'd initially thought, maybe 7 or 8, with a sad face that seemed too serious for her small frame. I drove past them, watching in my rearview mirror as they continued their walk. Then the girl's head snapped toward my truck with an unnatural quickness. Her eyes locked with mine in the mirror, and her lips moved. The words were unmistakable, "Help me." The woman's grip tightened on her shoulder at that exact moment, her fingers digging in. Her face twisted into something inhuman for just a split second, a flash of rage that wasn't just stern, but malevolent. She wasn't protecting her, she was her captor. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding on loose gravel. When I looked back, the roadside was empty. They hadn't walked away or faded gradually. They'd simply blinked out of existence. I sat there, engine running, knuckles white on the steering wheel, stomach churning. The girl's desperate plea burned in my mind. This wasn't some lost soul wandering aimlessly. This was a child trapped by something sinister. The woman wasn't her mother. She was her jailer, in death as she must have been in life. I almost turned back to search for them, my weekend plans forgotten. But what could I do? Chase ghosts across an empty construction site. And yet that plea kept echoing in my head. The terror in the girl's eyes, the woman's possessive grip. She needed help, not just from being dead, but from her. I missed my dinner plans. Instead, I drove straight to a bar and downed whiskeys until the bartender cut me off. The alcohol didn't help. The girl's face haunted me through a sleepless night. The next morning, my head splitting, I called in sick. I couldn't face that lake, not yet. Instead, I pulled up property records on my laptop. Nothing useful there. Next, I called an ex-girlfriend who worked at the local news station. She owed me a favor after I remodeled her kitchen last summer. I convinced her to let me access their digital archives after hours. That evening, I sat at her desk, searching through crime reports and old stories about the lake property, while she finished editing the weekend broadcast. It took most of the night, but I finally found something. A small article from June 1981, tucked away on page 9 of the local paper. A woman named Rebecca Torres and her daughter Emily had been reported missing after their car was found, abandoned near what was then a logging road running alongside the lake. The article was brief, noting that the woman's ex-husband had reported them missing when they failed to return from a custody exchange in Sacramento. Local police were investigating, but had few leads. I searched for follow-up articles, but found only one, dated 3 weeks later. The investigation had been transferred to the state police after local authorities exhausted their resources. There was no mention of the case being resolved, no reports of bodies found or the missing persons located alive. The ages fit. Rebecca Torres had been 32, her daughter 8. The timing was plausible. 42 years was well within the range of documented hauntings, if you believed in such things. And the location was exact. The abandoned car had been found precisely where the development's main entrance road now ran. What didn't fit was my role in all this. Why would these spirits, if that's what they were, reveal themselves to me? Why would the girl ask me for help? I had no connection to the case, no special skills or knowledge that might resolve whatever had happened to them. I returned to work the next Monday, unable to share my discoveries with anyone for fear of ridicule or worse. The sightings continued through the summer, but something had changed. The girl and woman appeared more frequently now, and not always at sunset. Sometimes I'd glimpse them during my lunch break or while inspecting work on the far side of the lake. They never approached the active construction areas, always maintaining their distance, always vanishing if I or anyone else came too near. But the girl continued to look at me whenever our paths crossed, her eyes finding mine across the water or through the trees. I never saw her mouth words again, but I felt the weight of her gaze, the expectation in her silent observation. In late August, the developer organized a media event to showcase the progress on the first few homes. Local news outlets sent reporters, and the city mayor made an appearance, praising the project for bringing jobs and tax revenue to the area. During the event, I watched as a photographer positioned the developer and various officials on the shoreline for a publicity shot. The lake and partially constructed homes forming a picturesque backdrop. When the photos appeared in the local paper the next day, I wasn't surprised to see that the girl and woman, who had been clearly visible to me standing at the water's edge during the shoot, were absent from the images. By September, the first 8 homes were nearing completion. The framing was done, roofs were on, and interior work was progressing on schedule. We'd broken ground on the next phase of houses, and the development was taking shape just as the architectural renderings had promised. The lake remained the centerpiece, its waters reflecting the new structures rising around it. The bench, where I'd first seen the girl, had been replaced with a more elaborate seating area, part of a community gathering space that would eventually include a small dock and pavilion. I wondered if the changes to the landscape would affect the hauntings, if the spirits were somehow tied to specific features of the land that were now being altered or removed. They weren't. If anything, the girl and woman became more visible as the summer progressed into fall. Other workers began to notice them too, though no one spoke openly about what they were seeing. I'd catch someone staring across the lake, their work temporarily forgotten, their expression a mixture of confusion and unease. When they realized I was watching, they'd quickly return to their tasks, avoiding eye contact or conversation. In October, I made a decision. I contacted the state police and inquired about the Torres case. The officer I spoke with was initially confused. The case was decades old and long since classified as cold. But when I mentioned I was working at a construction site near where the car had been found, his tone changed. He asked me to come to the station. The detective assigned to cold cases was a man in his 50s named Detective Rodriguez. He listened patiently as I described finding the newspaper articles. I didn't mention the ghostly sightings, focusing instead on my curiosity about an unsolved disappearance connected to the property where I was working. Rodriguez pulled the case file, thin and yellowed with age. The investigation had stalled almost immediately, he explained. Rebecca Torres' ex-husband, David, had been the primary suspect. Domestic disappearances almost always involved the former spouse, but there had been no evidence to support an arrest. No blood in the car or at their homes. No history of domestic violence. No life insurance policies or other financial motives. David Torres had an alibi for the day they vanished, verified by multiple colleagues at the insurance office where he worked. The case had gone cold within months. David Torres had moved away the following year, eventually remarrying and relocating to Arizona. He died in 2015, never knowing what had happened to his ex-wife and daughter. I asked if the lake had ever been searched. Rodriguez confirmed it had been multiple times over the years. Nothing had ever been found. He seemed to be studying me carefully, perhaps wondering why a construction foreman was so interested in a 42-year-old missing persons case. I thanked him for his time and left, no closer to understanding what I was experiencing at the lake. November brought heavy rains that delayed our work and transformed the site into a muddy mess. The lake level rose significantly, flooding parts of the newly landscaped shoreline and threatening the foundations of the homes nearest the water. The developer brought in environmental engineers to assess the situation, and they recommended installing additional drainage systems to manage the unexpected water volume. The excavation for these drainage systems began in late November, focusing on the southwestern shore where the flooding was most severe. 4 days into this work, one of the backhoe operators radioed me in a panic. They'd uncovered something in the soil about 8 feet below the original ground level. I arrived to find him standing pale-faced beside his machine. In the freshly turned earth lay the unmistakable shape of a car, its once metallic surface now reduced to rust and corrosion after decades underground. Even before the forensic team confirmed it hours later, I knew we'd found Rebecca Torres' missing vehicle, buried deep in what had once been a marshy area of shoreline, but was now solid ground due to decades of natural silting and deliberate landfill by previous property owners. The recovery took a week. The car had been deliberately buried under layers of soil and rocks, hidden from previous searches. Inside were two bodies, a woman and a girl. But the forensic report revealed something chilling. The woman wasn't Rebecca Torres. She was identified as Linda Hayes, Rebecca's neighbor and close friend. DNA confirmed the girl was Emily Torres. The truth emerged in fragments. Rebecca Torres hadn't just been planning to move away with Emily after a bitter custody battle. She had planned to disappear completely, starting a new life in another state. But Linda Hayes had discovered the plan and threatened to expose it. The plan had been for Linda to help Rebecca stage her own disappearance. Then Linda would claim she'd never seen them. But something went wrong. The sedatives Linda gave Rebecca didn't work as planned. Rebecca fought back. In the struggle, Linda accidentally killed her. Police found Linda's diary hidden in the car's spare tire well, somehow preserved in a waterproof bag. The final entry described Emily witnessing something she shouldn't have and threatening to tell her daddy what Miss Linda did to Mommy. Linda wrote that the girl couldn't be trusted anymore and she needed to fix the situation. Rebecca's body was never found. Construction at Riverside Meadows was halted for nearly 4 months during the investigation and subsequent media frenzy. The developer considered abandoning the project entirely, fearing the property would be forever tainted by its association with the murders. But by March, work had resumed, albeit with a more subdued marketing approach that emphasized the natural beauty of the area rather than its peaceful seclusion. I still work at the site, overseeing the completion of homes that will soon be occupied by families unaware or unconcerned about the tragedy that occurred there decades ago. The lake remains the centerpiece of the development, its waters calm and reflective on clear days. The girl and woman no longer appear on its shores. Whatever kept them bound to this place seems to have been resolved by the discovery of their bodies and the revelation of the truth about their deaths. Sometimes I find myself looking for them out of habit, scanning the shoreline or the bench where I first saw the girl sitting alone. But the only figures I see now are construction workers, landscapers, and occasionally prospective home buyers touring the property. Emily Torres can finally rest. Her captor can no longer hold her here, and the truth about what happened that day 42 years ago has finally been told. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.